World, another lunatic angel, another Ophelia. He closed his eyes afresh and kept them closed until, back in the wide desert, the white palace merged into the silvery cloud and the youthful maiden into the kneeling angel. Then, forcing his eyes to close tighter, he drowned his dream into a sea of darkness, shutting out the images. Yet he could still hear the receding farther and farther away like a dim memory, the prayer of a maiden. The music had long ceased, and he, wilful prey to his imagination, still kept his eyes closed. When awakening from his reverie, the upper window of the palace was still open, but the drawing-room was in darkness, its panes glittering in the white moonlight. A scent of summer suffused the translucent air, and the moonbeams, coming into Dionysus's chamber, flooded his pale face and repleted his mournful soul with an undefinable melancholy. Verily, he murmured his favorite quote, the world, that endless wasteland, is all there beneath our own brow, but wherefore the space only without the time, the past? He gazed again at the red-striped spider-web, and the stripes quivered into movement. He paced up linger on their center, and a sensation of spiritual voluptuousness flooded his soul. At first he seemed to hear the murmur of those old sages who, while a boy cuddled on their knees, would pass the winter nights recounting fantastic tales of fairies clad in gold and beams of light, living their untroubled lives in crystal palaces, and he had a yesteryear feeling of entangling his fingers in the tufts of their white beards, listening to their soft, all-wise voices, and good bygone past the sages' tidings, doubtless, an invisible hand was beckoning him to the past. He envisaged a train of princes and their thrones in time-old castles. He beheld the wise old men's council and elated Christian throng undulating the waves on the sea within the walls of the princely court, but the images were still mixed and blurred. The lines of the astrological sign kept writhing like as many serpents on fire. The spider was looming larger and larger. Where shall we shop? He heard a voice out of the glowing center of the book. Alexander the Good, he whispered, the low yet compelling voice, joy and wonder filling in the soul. While ever so slowly the red spider web grew larger, more immaterial, turning into a reddish sunset. He was lying sprawled in a freshly mown field, the stacked hay fragrant, the blue twilight sky clear and deep, clouds of fire and gold scattered all over the sky, the hills dinted with loads of purple, the birds on the wing, the mirrors and rivers turned reddish, the tremulous chime of a bell pealing out in the dusk, calling worshippers to evensong, while he himself, what a strange garb, a sackcloth surplice, a black hat, the book of astrology in his hand. Everything looked so familiar. He was no longer his old self. It seemed only natural that he should find himself in this particular world. He knew for certain that he had strolled out into the fields to read, and he had fallen asleep over his book. That dismal room, that bygone life of a man by the name of Dionysus, was but a strange dream. Alas, he thought, my book has played a trick on me, making me dream such extraordinary things. What a strange world! What strange people! What a language, sounding like ours, though different and alien. Odd, Brother Dan had dreamed he was a layman, by the name of Dionysus, and apparently other times that among other people. Odd. Alas, Master Reuben, he said with a smile, truly wondrous is your book. If only it would not befuddle the brain. At long last have I, a humble monk, grasped that the soul journeys from century to century, staying forever the same but for death, that makes it oblivious of its former lives. Right you are, Master Reuben, that the Egyptians did justice to metempsychosis. Right you are that boundless time and space are within our own soul, its magic wand we need to move any particular point we might wish. Here I am, living in Prince Alexander's reign, dragged by an unknown hand into times coiled within the future of my soul. How many selves are there in one man? As many as stars in a dewdrop beneath the sky of a clear night. And should one enlarge that drop so one could gaze into its depth, one would re-encounter all the myriad stars in the sky, each one a self-sufficient world with its own countries and nations, as well as its own history, a universe within an ephemeral drop. How profound this too can be, he mused on his teacher Reuben. He got up from the grass, an ancient book in his hand. In the far distance the mountains donned their forest-crowed brows, their sides sloping into white-brooked vales. Large round clouds, boding of storms, were sailing across the deep blue sky. The mountains showed through them a litter of backdrops and precipices. Black rocks and tree trunks occasionally broke through the mist, and a thunderstruck fir tree was perched in solitude on a peak, facing the setting sun. The sun hid behind the clouds, Painting them red and bluish with golden fringes, they ensconce the light of the heavenly Lord into a lofty vaults and deep caves, with purple pools overflowing through an occasional crevice in their dark ruins. Then, ever so slowly, they scattered into bluish-gray folds. The setting sun seemed to linger on the top of the solitary fir-tree, like a hollowed brow perched on dark shoulders, then climbing down. It looked like a ruby nest among the boughs. Then from behind the broad trunk he let fly rosy shafts at the rocks, rekindled the silvery embers of their brows, and it gradually sank behind the tall black mountain, painting its hemmed edges red against the blue air. Night is slowly closing in. Large stars bud forth in the blue plains of the sky, quivering voluptuously in the vesperal, soft, clear air, and this pastoral harmony suffuses the evening with its myriad voices, each different, yet each doing its bit for the moon's sweet and voluptuous drowsiness. Our monk is passing through a world turned russet, in the beauteous twilight. Heedless of the spell-binding mood of nature, his soul still immersed in a strange adventure. From far away he can spy the glittering church steeples of Yassi, the lovingly painted houses, their eaves violet in the light of the rising moon. He walked into the burrow of a hasty pace, and found himself in a narrow lane lined with old tumble-down houses, their upper stories jutting out over the lower, so that the former rested half on wooden stilts, with the other half upon the ground floor. Tall verandas protruded from the beneath long, stodgy, ramshackle houses, overgrown with black-green moss, old men sitting on the verandas, talking of this and that, young lasses, their faces as fresh as ripe apples, leaning their heads over the sills of opened latticed yellow window lined with potted gold-yellow flowers. Hither and thither some passer-by was whistling under his breath. Gradually the lanes fall into slumber, their shutters are pulled down, the candles are put out. The night guards strut by, their heads ducked down into their greatcoats, while our monk is heading on like a half-embodied shadow along the long, benighted lanes. He rested at his gate in front of a house standing by itself in the middle of a wasteland. Light was coming out through the slits in the shutters. The house had tapered roofing and walls of well-metalling stone, from which any trace of former whitewashing had peeled off so that it had taken on the look of a ruined citadel. The shutters were far wider than the narrow windows, and from the side of the veranda, supported by four-sided stone pillars, a long flight of steps led to the half-height of the house. There were neither trees nor outhouses around the homestead. The large yard with its dry grass stretched yellow in the moonlight, with only the hand-crank of the well groaning in the wind. He mounted the stairs at a run and knocked loudly at the door. There was a thud of footsteps in the hall. "Who's there?" asked a deep but quiet voice. "Me, Dan." The door was opened, and a tall man stood before Dan, gray-bearded and white-browed, wearing a small fez like a Jewish skull-cap on the crown of his head. He shook hands with the monk and showed him into the room. In old plank cases there were ancient leather-bound books, human skulls, and stuffed birds on the shelves lining the walls, a bed and desk, both cluttered with parchments and papers. A torch was casting its dim, red-yellow, drowsy light in an atmosphere heavy with the stench of bottled substances. Master Reuben was an old man of ancient type good looks, his high bald brow wrinkled with meditation, his great eyes arched and deep set in the head of a sage. His long beard, flowing down from beneath the cheekbones onto his bent chest, made him look like a sage of yore. His visage was composed, though not meek. Round his well-drawn mouth lurked a doubt-embittered tenderness. He was a scholarly Jew who had wandered from Spain to Poland, whence from the public teaching for staying faithful to his creed. The Prince of Moldavia and invited him to be master of mathematics and philosophy at the Sokola Academy. Brother Dan is one of the Academy's students of Reuben's particularity, who shares with him both his doubts and his secret discoveries. The wise Jew took in Dan's dreamy countenance with a spark of curiosity. "Well, it is fully as you have taught me, master," Dan said, "and now I stand convinced that boundless time is the creation of your immortal skull. I have lived in the future. Verily, there are two entirely different selves within me. One of them, Brother Dan, now addressing you, and living in Prince Alexander's reign, the other by another name, living 500 years in the future." Reuben replied, "You can live successively the lives of those that have caused you into the world, and of all those lives you might be cause of." Therefore, men cherish an awe-inspired feeling toward the preservation and enlargement of their lineage. It is they that are reborn in their descendants, and therein lies the difference between God and man. Man is a mere link in the chain of bygone men and men to come. God holds in his bosom all nations past and future. Man occupies a place in time, whereas God is time itself, and everything that comes to pass in it. Time coiled back onto itself like a brook whose water flows back into its own spool, or a wheel which holds all its ever-revolving spokes within its hub. Likewise our own soul is itself eternal, but in piecemeal fashion only. Imagine a moving wheel and a grain of dust glued to it. This grain will pass through all the spots the revolving wheel does, but successively, whereas the wheel is present at the same moment in all the spots it touches. I stand persuaded, master, as to time. But how about boundlessness? How about space? The same as with time, for you could be in piecemeal fashion in any desired place, which you cannot leave vacant. You know the all-powerful rule, there is no empty space, yet there is a means of negotiating that snag, a snag enforced by the perishable human body. As you have seen, there is an endless chain of people in one man. Unquestionably, it cannot be all self-sufficient, since, becoming so, he would refute your own existence. Actually, the eternal self is beside everyone at every moment, from whom the whole chain of transient people springs. You can see him, though you cannot lay hold of him. It is your own shadow. You could swap natures for a while, with you giving over your transient nature to your shadow, whereas he will lend you his eternal nature, so much so that as a shadow endowed with immortality, you will even partake of God's omnipotence. Your every wish will be no sooner thought than materialized, observing the right formula, of course, since they are as eternal as the words God uttered when he created the world, and they are all writ in the book which I lent you. Master Reuben, however could I bring myself to sound the depths of your wisdom? My wisdom is all there within your own self, a slumber and unveiled. Do you imagine you could make sense of my words without partaking of my own nature? Do you imagine I should have singled you out as my disciple if I had not considered you worthy and thoroughgoing? You are like a violin, with all the strains lying expectant for an accomplished hand to resurrect, and I am the hand that will resurrect your innermost self. Suppose this night I should attempt to project myself to a place of my own devising. That lies within your power, for it is already there in your immortal soul, unfathomably deep. On the 7th leaf of the book you will find all the formulae you might need for your venture. Doubtless we shall have to part forever, for in self-devised spaces our days are century-long, so on your return you will find no trace of Reuben, but some namesake of mine, whom you will meet easily, only that he might not recognize you, having lost the secrets of his wisdom and become a run-of-the-mill individual. Further advice from me would be useless, for when your shadow, still a shadow to you, starts speaking, he will be all wise and will instruct you how to proceed. As soon as you take over his nature, you will become all wise yourself and will not need me any longer. Yet you will have noticed one thing: my book, when perused line by line, stays incomprehensible, whereas whatever the starting place, if you skip to every 7th leaf, you will be astounded by a godlike clearness. That is a mystery I do not grasp myself, and is writ that no Christian can ever glimpse into the arcana lying beyond that number. No use inquiring of your shadow. The secret is beyond his understanding. It is writ that the devil, before his fall, had devised the abstruse idea which might have precipitated his destitution. Should you set your mind on unveiling it, everything around you would vanish into thin air. Time and space would forsake your soul, and you would wither away like a dry branch, likewise forsaken by time. Myself ignorant of that secret, unworthy to take the dimmest glimpse into it, I can give you no further advice. Reuben smoothed his beard thoughtfully, deep grief on his withered, wise face. Dan kissed his hand. Were not they to part forever? When Reuben picked up the fallen candle and tears glimmered in his eyes, both stood up. Dan threw his arms around Reuben's neck, sobbing like a son never to see his father again. Yet no sooner had Dan left the room and climbed down the stairs, holding the book under an armpit and raising the long tail of his surplice clear of the steps with no other hand, than the house turned into a black-walled cave, the wax candle into a floating live coal, the books into large glass bubbles tied with hands of parchment at the mouths, wherein, swimming in a fluid glittering violet blue, little devils were dithering, hanging by their horns and spinning their legs about. Reuben's face was creased by countless wrinkles. His shaggy beard forked into 2 goatees. His eyes grew glittery like 2 live embers. His nose twisted and withered like a tree stump, scratching a shaggy horned crow. He burst out into hideous roars of laughter, then, splitting his sides with bleeding, he croaked, "Haw, haw, one more soul gone to the devil." The devils made faces, jeered, and made some somersaults in their bubbles, while Satan stretched his stallion legs, gasping for air. Long have I had to wait to ensnare this pious monk, yet, at long last, haw, haw, yet, my old enemy will destroy him yet. I have had him think the idea secreted in the pages of the book will not flash through his mind, yet it must, it must. How on earth did it dawn on me? It was meant to. Meanwhile, Dan was passing with a sprightly step through the Boyar's district. The silver-white courtyards with verandas and outer staircases, their scrubbed with wax-polished planks, shining in the moonlight, hardly showed through the clumps of fruit trees in the orchards, the lower branches of which overhung fences, rows of palm-leafed nut trees, quinces and cherries, hither and thither an occasional yellow streak from an opening in the shutters would stray through the dark verdure of the gardens. He was walking at a hasty pace, now and then a belated gallant passed by him, long stapled hat on his head, wrapped in a cloak whose tail was raised by the sword on which he was resting his hand. At other places he would spy gallants jumping over fences, under the windows opening in the moonlight, some white shadow leaning its youthful head over the ledge toward the shadow below. At another place a shadow was heaving itself on to the grating and studying the flowers, its lips meeting the lips of another shadow, whose head was leaning out through the bars. Every now and then he would hear dogs wailing at the moon, the night guards bellowing, or see bands of gallants staggering back from some belated spree. They would tear twigs off the overhanging branches and throw them after the beardless pale monk. Stars were keeping vigil on the dome of heaven. The moon was guiding like a silver shield through the darkness of the clouds. There was gold in the air and a deep violet bluish shade in the fragrant gardens, dappled by white shafts dripping through the leafy meshes as if through strainers of light. He made it home. He dwelt in a tiny cell of the house of a rich boyar, minding his footsteps across the long veranda with overhanging eaves supported by white pillars. Noiseless as a shadow he passed, and on entering his cell he heaved a deep sigh. Was he not to undertake an unheard-of venture? The darkness of his cell, stuffy with the smell of incense, was scattered only by the red speck of a lamp flickering away on a shelf stacked with bane and flowers, under the silver-bound icon of the Saviour. In the hearth a cricket was chirping its hoarse voice. He lit a black lamp burning on cooking oil. Its light gave out flickering fumes, and the sluggishly enlivening light he sat at his table and opened the old book in Cyrillic script, with faded letters and occult meanings. In the ear-ringing silence he seemed to hear the very thoughts, scent and sprouting, of a pretty red carnation set in a plot between the curtains at his window. He sat staring at his own shadow, looming huge and fantastic on the smoky wall. The light was fluttering as if to reach the ceiling, while his shadow sprawled like a beak-nosed gnat. The fur hat over his eyes looked as if having engaged Dionys in a friendly conversation. It seemed to him he was posing his shadow-pointed questions, the latter replying in long-winded sentences, a dialogue of sorts, yet, when attempting to account for its reality, it came down to a dialogue between his own reflections, between two sides of his own self. Odd. This split of his personality resulted in a strange idea. He cast a long, stern gaze at his shadow, who, irked by that gaze, took sharper and sharper outlines on the wall, growing clearer, like an old oil painting. He blinked, and the shadow turned back into what it used to be. This is a monumentous hour. I ought to give it some pause, he mused. Have I ever nursed a wish for my own benefit, mine alone? Definitely not. Have I ever left her out of my prayers? Maria? Oh, no. Whenever I beseeched some extraordinary power, it was on her behalf that I did so. Alas, that I could take her to a desert with no living soul about, no one but the two of us, bring down the stars in the sky onto the wide expanse of sand, turn them into hosts of gold and silver flowers, lay out laurel groves with shady paths and crystal-clear blue lakes for her to hide along the paths ensconced beneath the foliage, feigning to shun my love, with me chasing her. Nay, heaven itself would be wasteland without her. And what a gem Maria was! She was the daughter of Tutor Mystacon, the sword-bearer, an angel, blonde as a golden teardrop, lissom as a wax lily, with pious blue eyes, as pious and blue as the deep of the sky for all its divine eternity. Oft would she raise her eyes from the prayer-book to cast one more look at the monk's pale, haggard face. Oft had he spied her sprouting, like a flower at the window, and of a moonlit night He would throw aside his surplice to don a gallant's cloak, and keep vigil beneath her lighted window until they opened, revealing her visage wan with sleeplessness and love, the rays of her eyes gliding deeply into his dark eyes. A few words, a touch of the hands, and she would vanish into her balmy alcove, having enriched his nights with sweet, unforgettable dreams. Now his thoughts flew out to her again. The lamp was flickering more oddly. The ancient letters in the book were taking on meanings, creeping into his dreams and thoughts, whirling in his weak-willed hand. His shadow started again to take on the outlines of an oil icon, his wide brow pale and smooth, his lips bluish, gray streaks in his hair, his deep-set eyes focused on the book lying open in front of Dan. His shadow was whispering in rambling thoughts, the very answers he had been grappling with. You are aware, his shadow was thinking, and he could hear the train of his thoughts, well aware that since the dawn of the world up to this very moment your soul has been making a wearisome journey in thousands of bodies, now long turned to dust. It knows not, since every time it took the shape of a new body it had drunk of Let's tasteless water of oblivion, and no one but me has accompanied it on its forgotten journey, me, the shadow of the bodies it has dwelt in, me, your shadow. I was present at every burial, as I was present by your cradle, and so shall be by your grave. Your soul, though today it remembers not, once dwelt in Zoroaster's breast. He who could command the stars to change their places with his almighty word, and the combined operation of his numbers. Zoroaster's book, with all the mysteries of his science, is lying there before your eyes. Long centuries have brooded over it with the sounding of its depths. It is only I who can unravel it, for I used to converse with Zoroaster from high on my wall, as I am doing now with you. Dan realized clearly that his nature was made up of two sides, one side eternal, the other transient. Zoroaster's book was rightful possession. He turned 7 leaves, and his shadow took on the outlines of a bas-relief, then another 7, and by slow degrees he detached himself as if from within a frame, leaped down from the wall, stood by him translucent and smiling, and uttered in a clear, respectful voice, "Good evening." The red flame of the lamp stood between Dan and the newly embodied shadow. "Let us proceed," said the shadow, resuming the train of his ideas, which Dan could hear as if they were his own. "Your appropriating my essence by force of magic in exchange for yours compels me to turn into an ordinary man, my past washed out of my memory, whereas you are to become eternal and all-wise like me, and by the agency of the book, all-powerful as well. You will leave me in your former milieu, as with the embodied shadow of your sweetheart and your friends. You have doomed me to forget my visionary essence, whereas you will be setting out on a journey, your sweetheart at your side, to any place in the universe that you might wish, to the moon, for instance. Living there, a century will seem no longer than a day. You could even take the whole earth with you, and no harm would be done. Turn it into a pearl earring, and hang it on your sweetheart's necklace, and verily, though thousands of times smaller, humans will consider themselves as big as they are now, provided that you observe their proportions. Their time? An hour of your life will be a century in theirs. Your moments will be decades for them, and during those moments they will find time to wage war, crown kings, nations will be extinguished and born. In short, all of today's follies will be reenacted, on a diminished scale, of course, but exactly the same follies. Very well, said Dan, taking hold of the shadow's cool, diaphanous hand, yet I entreat you to write down the memoirs of your life for me to find and read when I return to earth. Yours is a cool judgment, so you are well fit to record the visionary and delusive nature of all things human, from the flower telling candid lies from beneath its dazzling attire, seemingly happy, so tucked within its tender organs, up to man coding with idle prattle and all-pervading hypocrisy, long as the history of mankind, the dark evil kernel which is the nethermost root of his life and deeds, his egotism. You will see how we are fed lies in school, in church, in government, namely, that we are to enter the world of justice, love, and saintliness, the more bitterly to realize on our death-bed that it has been one of injustice and hatred. Alas, whoever would wish for life, if while still a toddler, instead of fairy tales, we are apprised of the real plight of things before turning him loose into the thick of life? A philosopher's calling, said the shadow with a bitter smile. So be it. Your words have settled my fate. I shall light my lamp and go out into the street in search of men. You will find the memories of my life in the drawer of the desk over there when you come back. As for me, I shall be long dead and buried when you return, since the hours of your life will be long years on the earth. Turn another 7 leaves and hold me by the hand. What are you feeling? My arms melting away into thin air, yet gaining gigantic powers. The dull cells of my brain splitting asunder, leaving my mind as clear as the light of day. I feel, said the shadow of a low voice, The awareness of my immortality darkening and melting away, my thoughts heavy as lead. Turn another 7, and the mutual metamorphosis will be completed. Dan turned to the leaves, whispered something, and the shadow became man. The man, his spitting image, stood staring at Dan as an apparition, diffident and oblivious, his lips trembling and his legs unsure. Dan was a gleaming shadow. He raised his long, strong arm. "Go to sleep," he commanded. The grandfather clock whirred hoarsely. The embodied shadow slumped onto the bed in a sound sleep. Dan threw his long cloak over his shoulders, put out the lamp, tiptoed across the veranda, got out, closed the door, and started at a slow pace along the moonlit wide street of the town, with shuttered windows and barred gates, with walls turned yellow in the moonlight, drawn curtains, and occasional night guard, his mustache tucked up in the collar, and the hood of his cloak and a truncheon under his armpit. In fine, the slumberous, quiet, warm summer air, with the moon shining bright, golden stars blinking, their eyes shut and open again, a blue, cloudless sky, tall houses, their tiled eaves, gazing up at the moon. That was the picture. His shadow's footsteps roused no sound in the street. He was wrapped in his cloak, the brims of his hat slouched down over his eyes, walking along the brightly lit streets, and the moonlight cast no shadow on the walls. Having left his own at home, he looked like a clumsy shadow running along the walls of the lined houses. The house in the far corner of the lane was yellow, with windows gilt by the moonlight, and white curtains. He tapped gently on the pane. "Is it you?" answered a soft, beloved voice. "Me. Open the window. There is no one in the streets. No soul can see you. And even if someone could," the window was opened slowly, the curtain drawn aside, and between its folds appeared, lovely and pale, the blonde head of an angel. The moonlight flooded her visage, making her blue eyes shiner blue still, and blink as if smarting under a sunbeam. Under the white nightgown, beneath the neckline, her budding breasts were throbbing. She held out her bare hands and arms, and he covered them with kisses. A moment later, he jumped over the window-sill, folded her bare neck into his arms, then cuddled her face in the cup of his hand, and kissed her so ardently, hugged her so passionately, as if he would have drained out her life through her pressed lips. "Dearest," he said, caressing her golden hair, "dearest, follow me into the wide world." "Where?" "Where? Anywhere. We shall live such happy, untroubled lives, sufficient unto ourselves, wherever we might go. We shall build castles of our dreams, spread out seas with myriads of wavy mirrors of our thoughts, weave centuries of bliss of our days together. Come." "What will mother say?" she blurted out with tears in her eyes. Her shadow loomed on the wall. Dan stared at it. Forthwith it came off, floated on a moonbeam, and slumped onto the bed. "Who is there?" asked Maria, shivering against his chest. "Only your shadow," he answered with a smile. "It will stay behind. Behold how it sleeps." "Oh, how free and weightless I feel!" she exclaimed, a golden tingle in her voice. "No pang or passion in my breast. Oh, thank you. How handsome you look to me now, as if a novel one from another world." "Come with me," he whispered into her ear. "Come through swarms of stars and throngs of rays until, far from this wretched, dismal earth, we will forget all and have only our own selves in mind." "Let us go, then," she whispered, encircling his neck with her white arms and pressing her mouth against his lips. Her kiss inspired him with genius and new power. Holding her in his embrace, he wrapped his glossy black cloak about her white shoulders, reached his arms about her waist, nestled her at his chest, and fluttering the tail of his cloak with the other hand, they rose ever so slowly up through the shimmering moonlight-bathed air, through the black clouds in the sky, through clusters of stars until they reached the moon. Their journey had felt like one long kiss. He let go of his sweet burden on the redolent bank of a blue lake that mirrored all the encircling wreath of groves, delighting the eye with the world of its depths. He resumed his journey to the earth, nigh to the earth. He sat on the edge of a black cloud and gave the earth a long, brooding last look. He produced Zoroaster's book, leafed through some pages, and started to read the judgment on earth. Every letter in the book a whole year, every line a century of truth. It was terrifying how many crimes had been perpetrated on this puny atom, small fry in the boundless ocean of the universe, on this black, inconsequential clod of dirt called earth. The grains of this clod are called empires, the barely discernible germs, emperors, with the remaining myriads of germs playing the subjects in this nightmare stream. His hand reached out toward the earth. Together with the sphere around it, ever more and faster, it shrank into a blue pearl, gold speckled outside and black cord inside, size being only relative. It stands to reason that the atoms at the pearl's core, whose bounds were the sky, whose raindrops were the sun, the moon, and the stars, though infinitesimal dwarfs, still crowded kings kept waging wars. while their poets racked their brains for the most appropriate metaphors and similes in the universe in order to extol their heroes. Dan took the telescope and gazed through the pearl's husk, wondering what it was that prevented it from bursting into smithereens from all the hatred it had amassed. He took it in the palm of his hand, and back on the moon he hung the blue pearl on his sweetheart's necklace. And how beautiful he had made the moonscape! Endowed with a gigantic imagination, he hung two suns and their moons, and the deep blue of the sky that it had his residential palace built out of the rocks of a mountain range. The colonnades, hoary rocks, the eaves, an ancient forest soaring up to the clouds, lofty staircases climbed down the caved-in mountain sides, patches of forest slanted down into gorges, and into a vast valley watered by a stately river, its floating islands like a many tree-covered ships. The glittering mirrors of its waves reverberated the starry icons into the deep, so much so that gazing into it was like gazing at the sky itself. The islands were covered with hallowed incense trees and amber gravel. The shady groves along the banks cast their image into the river bed, so it seemed that the same route was the starting point of a heaven soaring up into the light of dawn and of another one submerged in the waters. Rows of cherries shed the rosy load of snow of their wealth of blossoms for the wind to amass into snowdrifts. The flowers made the air resound, their leaves alive with gold-speckled beetles, their murmur a world of voluptuous thrill. Husky grasshoppers were chirping like as many grandfather clocks scattered about the grass, and emerald spiders had woven across an island a bridge of adamantine gauze, glittering so violet blue and transparent that the moonbeams crossing it spread a green glimmer over the myriads of waves on the river. Tall and lithe and silver-white in the sheen of night, Maria would pace across the bridge, braiding her hair, golden strands stealing down through her wax-like fingers, her weightless limbs showing through her silvery grab. It's probably supposed to be garb, but it's grab. Her snow-white feet barely touching the bridge. At other times, seated in a cedar boat, they would sail down the submissive waves on the river. He would rest his brow girt with a wreath of blue flowers on her knee, and a magic bird would warble on her shoulder. The wide river ran deeper into the dark forests, where its water gave only sparse glitters under an occasional sunbeam. The tree trunks reached their branches over the river in high vaults of virgin verdure. An occasional flashing streak would quiver across the water. One moment. I'll be right back. I hope there wasn't any interruption in the stream. Okay, I'll go back. An occasional flashing streak would quiver across the water. The merry waves drove on their blue pageant until all of a sudden, dammed by rocks and mountains, the river gathered its waters amid the forest into the wide mirror of a sea, settling clear under the suns and displaying all the silverware on its floor. To pass the time they devised a game of cards. The kings, queens, and knaves on the cards were characters from the fairy tales they were wont to tell each other at night. The game itself was a long-winded and complicated tale like the Arabian Nights, wherein the queens were wooed, the kings married, and the poor knaves roamed about love-smitten. Yet the yarn never got unwound, for they would give up, visited by slumber. And what a wondrous slumber it was! Before going to sleep, she would join her hands, and under the stars, playing the horizon of the universe on airy strings, her lips would breathe out a smiling murmur, then her head, pale in the night's sweet-scented breeze, would sink into the pillows. Oh, that one could have beheld her at such moments, but one could, save he, who would cover her arm, hanging down over the side with kisses. He would fall asleep on his knees. They would dream the same dream, mirroring skies, angels gliding on white heavenly wings, lofty portals, marble cornices, layers upon layers of the blue stars on silvery ceilings, everything suffused with a bracing, balmy air. Only one closed gate they were not allowed to open. A fiery eye girt with a triangle was over it, and a tag written on the twisting script of dark Arabic above the eye. It led to the dome of God, the tag an enigma to the angles themselves. How come man is never to drain dry the cup of happiness? Oh my goodness! I'm sorry. I'm going to have to like write down these things this story has been reminding me of. Um, Maybe I should just go ahead and do that now. But first of all, like earlier in the story, there was that thing about all the cats, which reminds me of Saint Loneliness. And then there are two different things that the thing about the shadow remind me of that are both like two different Motens videos. One of them is I can't remember the name of it. There's one that's like the Motens and Alina Aramaya, and the other one is I think I could be wrong. I don't know. It's there's this one where he's facing himself in the mirror, and he's talking to his younger self through the mirror, but then the two parts merge into one being. Um, this is just me continuing reading from where I left off yesterday. I had to stop reading because the Nook ran out of battery. That's why it seems like it's in the middle like that. Um, so I hope that makes sense. That's why this is a part two. Um, just to explain. But the book it has several things in it. It's got like it started with the poems and then it went into like his longer sort of stories. He's Romanian and there are so many things throughout this one story that just remind me so much of Motans. But anyway, the line just then about about drinking happiness. There's a song by the Motans called In This Bus, which is about um, wanting to drink happiness, basically. To drink happiness. And it's one of my favorite songs by the Motans. But it's got like so much of this story is just so very reminiscent of the Motans. It's funny because one time I was reading this like these stories, and there were some that reminded me of Carlot's dreams. And sometimes some things remind me of Smiley. But in this case, this one actually is reminding me a lot of the Motans. Anyway, I'll go back. Anyway, that's why I just kind of... There's just so much to this. It's... How come man is never to drain dry the cup of happiness? The Arabic sign on the dome of God was always on Dan's mind, and vain was his search. In Zoroaster's book, it remained deaf to his questioning. Yet the same dream haunted him every night. Every single night he would take Maria for a stroll about the sunny world of heaven, and in every dream he had Zoroaster's book with him, and searched for the answer to his question between the covers. To no avail with the angels fetching a mortal's prayers in their laps cast him telling glances. To no avail was an angel's placating whisper in his ear. Why seek for that which is beyond your understanding? Why belabor brass and expect it to sound like gold? It is beyond you. Yet it seemed odd that whatever he wanted the angels to carry out his wishes, they should willingly obey his unuttered thoughts. He could not grasp that preordained harmony between his drawing ideas and the life of the flight of angels. Can you not see me, Maria, that I have the angels at my beck and call? She gently shut his mouth with the palm of her hand. Then she whispered in his ear, when rainfall comes, all the grain rejoices. When God wills it, your thoughts partake of the angel's thoughts. All to no avail. His mind was set, and gaze of his large eyes stayed riveted on the eternally closed gate. I wish to behold the face of God, he confided in an angel passing by. If you have him not within your own soul, he will eschew you forever, and searching for him will be like chasing the wind, the angel replied sternly, whence he felt his head alive with songs. The airs were humming limpid, sweet and clear in his infatuated mind, as if in a beehive, the stars themselves twinkling to their time, and the angels gleefully passing by, giving voice to the lays in his head. Beauteous angels were passing by, clad in silver white browed, their dark blue eyes glittering in the sunlight, their flawless breasts smooth as marble, the curls of their hair streaming about the shoulders. An angel, the most beauteous he had ever beheld in his sunny dreams, was playing such a well-known tune on his harp that he could anticipate every note of it, and the air itself turned reddish with its voluptuousness. Only the Arabic sign was still glowing red like live embers in the night. That is the question, Dan muttered, the enigma holding sway over my soul. Will they not play whatever I might be thinking? Will not the world move according to my wishes? He hugged Maria to his breast in the foreboding pain. The pearl of the earth was flashing forth fiery beams from her necklace. It is wholly unconceivable that I myself should be... Bang! The peal of a gigantic bell, the sea's death, the sky's collapse. The vaults were caving in their blue enamel splitting apart, and Dan felt thunderstruck and marooned into boundlessness. Flashes of lightning chased him with hordes of old thunder. All the uproar of boundlessness roused into motion. Alas, your wretched thought, he blubbered. He kept hold of Zoroaster's book in spasmodic grips, and instinctively broke loose the earth's bead from Maria's necklace. She was torn off from his arms, like a willow reaching its boughs out to him in the midst, while crying in its fall, Dan, what have you done to me? Voice boomed out in his wake. What do you think, you wretch? Lucky you for not having uttered the whole world. Sucked into boundlessness as if by a magnet, he was falling quick as lightning, thousands of years in 1 second. Presently the darkness around him grew still, pitch black, devoid of a sound or spark of light. He opened his book, threw the bead away, and started reading. The bright bead was falling through the darkness, becoming larger and larger, and glaring bright, until it was like a moon in the offing. While book in hand he was wafting earthwards towards the thick ceiling of clouds, heading for the earth. He could already spy the glittering steeples of a city, stray lights, a summer night with golden air, fragrant gardens, and he opened his eyes. He somehow struggled out of sleep. The sky was high, and the deep blue sky like a burning sphere of gold. The garden outside the window by which Dionys had been sleeping was dewy green and cooled after the rainy night. The enlivened flowers lifting their dallying childish heads, their eyes brimming with cool idle tears. In the house opposite, the white curtains were still drawn with the cherries in blossom and the sweet scented locust trees, and her garden cast a melancholy bluish shade over the crisscrossing walks. Had his life Had his so lifelike dream been only a mere dream, or had it been the dreamlike reality of the stamp of all human realities? The curtain opposite was slightly drawn, and a maid's blonde head appeared between its folds. She was laughing. "Maria," he whispered, his very heartstrings aching. Her pigtailed blonde hair fell over her shoulders. A purple rose bloomed by her temple. Her mouth was small as a ripe cherry, and her face white and red as a ripe apple. Having had her laugh, he had no inkling at what. She dropped the curtain back. Yet his heart pounded violently in his breast, for the object as well as the idleness of his dreams had dawned upon him. Now he knew he was in love. Wherefore this to top it all? He brooded, his soul brimful with tears. Ah! That's another one by him. This also has a little in it that's kind of that's another one that kind of this sort of reminds me of. As the idleness of his dreams had dawned upon him, now he knew he was in love. Wherefore this to top it all? He brooded, his soul brimful with tears. Suffice the misery I had been living in, a misery with no yearnings, at least. And my very first wish, my last perhaps unattainable. The bittersweet line about his mouth sank deeper. His soul winced at the thought that he could not bring himself to shake off the burden of this love. Hope? None. Was a feeling he had ever experienced before to be born together with love? She reappeared and smiled. This time she drew the curtains aside, and holding a carnation in her white hand, she fixed her thoughtful gaze on its purple calyx. "This precious gem," he whispered, staring at her. Alas, she ought to have been merciful, yet why was she smiling? At that window of all places, could she not see him? What if she did see him, if her smiles were meant for him? The little wily flirt, yet, she disappeared. I shall write to beg her to cease smiling, lest she should instil an idle, painful illusion into my soul. She cannot deny me that much. She is so kind, I will entreat her to be wicked. In a painful, excruciating voluptuousness, he wrote to her, "My star." Okay, now this one is now it's getting to be kind of like this one Carlos Dreams song. "Bereft of fortune, beauty, and wit, my heart is ailing like sunlight, strayed in the night, for I love you. Your eyes, two molten morning stars, pierce so deeply, so blessedly deep into the darkness of my soul that they make me daydream of you, and if asleep I awaken at the recollection of their light. If you could only divine the feeling I have unbosomed into these lines, my angel, nay, not a shadow of the pain that tears at my heart to break it apart, could have crossed your serene life, breaks it. Imagine a man endowed with sense, a man of flesh and blood, reduced to the undying embodiment of despair. You would not know of such creatures. They do not belong in the company you keep. They are rabble. When a soul in misery and torment, unworthy of loftier feelings, for such feelings will abide in mightier breasts, when such a soul would raise its aspirations to you unwillingly, struggling to smother them, yet powerless to keep them in check, which feeling would get the better of such a soul? Grief? That is not what grief is made of. Despair? Not despair either. It is the soul's agony. An idle, cruel, and foredoomed struggle. Despair will slay. This feeling tortures. Love, martyrdom is thy name. In every broken heartstring lies a boundless world of pain, and my heart is being broken string by string instead of bursting once and for all. Death is but a moment. Despair is lifelong. Such a feeling is what hell is made of. Maria, could you imagine such torture without shedding tears of pity? Nay, of horror. However callous a heart, there must be some feeling to move it. However embittered a soul, there must be some pain to soften it, and there is no pain like mine. Why did I happen on this earth at a time when it was preordained that you should live? Why did I set eyes on you? Why did I see you? Had I been blind, I should have been spared all this suffering. Had I not been born at all, I should have been spared a tortured, barren, purposeless life. My flower, how you smile amid the garden of your life, little knowing that a soul is writhing in the agony of death nearby, and your ignorance renders you even more beauteous. So much the more the cause of my cruel pain. Alas, the more beauteous you are, the unhappier you make me, and the more unhappy poor me, the more beauteous you are. I was not given to cherishing any hopes, and little did I care. I cherished no wishes, not one in my whole wretched life, and little did I care. One durst I have only to fill my whole life, and even that unattainable, you. However great your pity, I cannot come down so low. Do not smile at me. Your smile would fill me with idle hopes. Since you cannot bring yourself to love me, lend me your contempt instead. Pray, your contempt might fortunately kill me, and death will be a godsend after my present pain. It's like it's like that. But there are other songs too that are just so close to that. Just by them. Anyway. Pray, your contempt might fortunately kill me, and death will be a godsend after my present pain. I worship the ground under your feet, the walls your shadow may once have glided young, yet I beg for your contempt. I cannot forbear loving you. You would not know why, it is beyond me to explain, yet the shade you have cast over the web of my thoughts is the only happiness I have ever known in this world. Maria, that is your name for sure, the only name worthy of you. You, I cannot call you by any other name. Farewell, farewell. Albeit he had finished the letter, a bittersweet hope, as idle as single-minded, intoxicated his soul. He was imagining she could be his, Maria, a whole universe in one single world, dreaming of her golden head in the cup of his hands, her eyes melting away under his kisses, of her dainty waist resting in the crook of his arm, of how he would hold her white, dainty hand. Gazing at her diaphanous fingers for hours and hours, he felt like he was losing his mind. What is life after all? He felt an hour next to her would be more profitable than a whole lifetime. What intense, excruciating, unspeakable bliss an hour of love! And how he would talk to her, what words he would summon to life, outdoing each other in tenderness, though meaningless and uncommon, for a smile of her lips, a fleeting smile, the shadow of a happy thought. What gratitude for a look, what thankfulness for a moment with her sweet fingers in the palms of his hand. And he actually felt them nestled close to his pounding heart. Like a child, he would weep and laugh for joy, and he would go mad at last to dream forever of that incomparable hour. Whence this unbridled feeling, whence this unrestrained madness? He could not feel his head or his heart. Everything was swimming around him in a rosy light. He could only see the white curtains, and from behind them his head appeared smiling with diffident and childish willingness. In love with her? Far beyond that. Not with her, but with her every thought, step, smile, a thousandfold love. Had he been God, he would have forsaken his universe to look for another in her blue eyes, and who knows what he would have found for it. But the search would have gone on forever. How he loved her! Had she scorned him, he would have loved her scorn. An inkling of her hatred would have kindled his love for a lifetime. Alas, he smiled in painful intoxication, that I could kiss her at once at least. I would wish for nothing more, or to caress her hands, or to unbraid her hair, or to kiss her shoulders, angel of mine. He had sent the letter. He was standing at the window, restless as if he had been expecting a death sentence, not knowing what to think, nay, not thinking at all. A rambling medley of hazy, intoxicating images fleeting through his mind. Alas, he had asked for scorn and was hoping for love. She appeared at the window. He hid behind the curtain to spy on her. His eyes were dry with fever and blazing with morbid desire. There she was, his beauty, her large, deep eyes stained with tears, gazing at her lower jointed hands holding the letter, a wavering expression on her face, about to cry like a guilty child. He shut up at his window, and her tear-stained eyes took him in, deep, compassionate, swimming. She crumpled the letter, raised it to her heart, and a sharp, violent ache darted through his heart. His life seemed to fail him, his heart to split apart. A white haze filmed his eyes, then nothing, nothing. He had fallen headlong on the floor of his chamber. The maiden ran away from the window in fright. "What letter is that in your hand, Maria? And what had happened to your looks? What's amiss?" said a kindly elderly man, who had just come to the window, raising the maiden's oval chin in his finely shaped hand. She made an attempt to smile, but painfully and uneasily. "Let's have it." Half smilingly, he unfolded the crumpled letter in her hand, read it, and his countenance grew more and more thoughtful. He arrived at the signature. "From whom have you received this letter, and where does he live?" Tears flooded her eyes, and she took shelter against her father's chest, sobbing. "You see," she said haltingly, "he dwells over there in that deserted house across the road. I saw him collapse like a corpse, no telling whether he be not dead already. Make haste, father, it might be too late. It might not be too late. What did he look like? The elderly man asked, apparently under the burden of obscure thought. Oh, he is so handsome, she let slip, and she bit her smiling lips. A bespectacled bald man appeared, whom the elderly man addressed in a flustered low voice, proffering the letter. The bald man shook his head. They sped down the stairs and reached the house opposite in no time. Though both elderly men, their haste betrayed their lively concern, and Dionys. They opened the door. Dionys lay sprawled headlong on the floor, his hair disheveled, his eyes closed tight. The bald-headed man lifted him from the floor and bared his chest. Within an ace of having a vein burst in his heart, he muttered in a hushed voice, he seems very high-strung. Too great a joy could be the end of him. Dangerous even to wake. I shall chloroform him to make his swoon into a deep sleep. While the doctor, for you may have guessed that was the calling of our bald-headed man, was muttering to himself and nodding his head, lifting his eyebrows and moving his spectacles up onto his brow, Maria's father kept staring at the portrait on the wall. A brief word of explanation. The person now under the care of Aesculapius had rights to a certain inheritance. Evidence was adduced by his likeness to the portrait, as well as by several other circumstances beyond our scope, yet all of them connected with Dionysus as far as obscure abstraction. Suffice it to say that his financial standing knew an instant change for the better. He was lying on his bed, his head propped up on the pillows reclining his chest, and the peaceful marble-like pallor of his face were at variance with his disheveled hair. One hand was resting on his chest, convulsively alleviating the pain inside. I'm sorry, my hand. The other was hanging over the bedside. He was covered with a black cloak, the creases of which revealed his gentle, finely built frame. Maria's father bent over him, a pleased, purposeful look about his face. Aha, the doctor mused slyly. A thick mist, gray and shimmery, then a sky of eternal blue darkness. Stars turned mellow under the night's breath, wrinkled clouds, warm air, and again the old city with narrow streets, cramped houses, musty eaves in the moonlight, while Dan was pacing briskly along the streets, with the moon darting forth occasional streaks through the darkness, and back into his house, his brain fully conscious of his prolonged dreams. So the wretched idea did flash through my mind, he exclaimed, that Reuben had thought beyond human understanding. His shadow was sleeping on the bed. He started leafing Zoroaster's book. The shadow got up slowly, with eyes shut, grew thinner, became one with the wall, and took on an ironic, fantastic position looming alongside him. Dan was feeling ill, dejected, coward under the burden of his thoughts. Besides, a flash of lightning had pierced his heart in his fall. He could still feel the lightning knifing through his heart. He lay on his bed and spread the surplice over him. Uncanny creatures, the like of which he had never set eyes on, were fleeting to and fro before his eyes. Alas, he thought, my hour of death has come, and this must be the shadows from the nether world. His own shadow alone was looming erect, apparently smiling, and how odd its eyes were blue. What the hell, he thought, I have become the laughing-stock of my own shadow. The door opened, letting Master Reuben in. What the deuce? Master, how long have you been growing whiskers and wearing that Jewish gown? For a long time, sir, so help me God. For as long as I can remember, and Reuben smoothing his beard. Have you ever seen me in another guise by the old court? By the old court dwells someone called Reuben, the bookseller. Not you, Master Reuben. Reuben gave him a thoughtful look. You are not quite yourself, sir, he said gravely. I am dying, Master Reuben. Have a look at my desk. There are memoirs of my shadow, the one you see on the wall while I was on the moon. The Jew gave the ailing boy another thoughtful look and shook his head. That shadow of yours is only a portrait in greater resemblance, he said. Master Reuben, either your judgment hasn't changed for the better since I last saw you, said the youth with a smile, or I've turned into a being superior to my master, which might be true. The Jew went to the desk the ailing boy had pointed to, opened its drawer, and true enough found some bundles of yellowed, antiquated papers tied together with blue strings. He took them out, leafed through them, then put them down on the desk. Thereupon 2 men entered Dan's cell, who he had never seen before. One of them, bald-headed and withered, came to him to feel his pulse, while the other was talking to Reuben. Reuben pointed to the papers. The man gave them a cursory examination. Not a shadow of doubt, he said to himself. How long have you known him? He added, turning to the Jew. A long time. He buys books from me, usually the oldest and the most unsaleable. I used to buy them from wholesale, then from destitute libraries of old people whose heirs sold them for a song, books hardly worth the value of their paper. And he would steep himself in such trash buying, the most obtuse and incomprehensible, I have brought some old curiosities with me to show him and make him a quick sale, yet I know I have found him in his plight. Besides, he does not call me Sirrah Reuben any longer, but Master Reuben. God only knows why the strings in the poor boy's brain have gone haywire." The ailing boy overheard all this, and did not know what to make of it. "These men must be mad," he was thinking, "and Master Reuben is completely out of his mind. He does not talk sense. Aha!" he thought at last. "I must be dead, so Reuben has brought the doctors with him to sell my corpse. He has every right to it. My body must have become phenomenal owing to the charges I have been passing through. But are these two real doctors? Both look like Satan to me. Or are they one man, split into two apparitions, so the crafty Reuben can poke fun at me, one half with hair, the other bald. The bald-headed half is feeling my pulse, while the hairy one is scanning my shadow hung on that nail on the wall. Lo, he is taking it down from the wall and handing it to Reuben. "Well done, Master Reuben," he cried. "Your devils are skilful in taking shadows off the wall, and now the bald one is going to grab me, for I can see through him, though he is playing the doctor. Well done, well done." He started clapping his hands in a fit of laughter. Reuben took his shadow and the papers on the desk and left the house, slamming the door behind him. "You have left me, old Jew, after selling me to the tormentor of souls." He murmured in painful resignation and let his head drop onto the pillows. "He is feverish, in delirium," the bald-headed man said gravely. Night. A fragrant cool is coming in by the open window, while Dionysus, lying in his bed, is shivering with fever, his lips dry, beads of sweat on his brow, his mind in a haze. He seems to have awakened from a succession of never-ending, obscure, meaningless dreams, and he is scanning the reality around him with misgiving. His father's portrait is missing from the wall, and so are the ancient books, yet the house is the same, with fashionable and new furniture, the floor spread over with the carpets, the old bed alone in the same. "Odd," he mused, wonder succeeding wonder. "I can no longer count my bearings." The moon was flooding his room with golden light, and the furniture and the carpets gave a smooth, slumbery shimmer. Under this translucent enamel, a high-pitched grandfather clock was ticking sluggishly on the wall, with a train of fleeting, hazy, blurred images of recent occurrences was flickering through his mind, and they all had the inconsistency of dreams, for he felt his present mood refreshed, cool, and clear as compared to the previous flight. The shady world of his youth had vanished from around him, and he was envisaging his future as if gazing at the bottom of a quiet, crystal-clear lake. He could not account for that clearness of mind. He closed his eyes. All of a sudden he felt someone at his bedside, seated on his legs. Then he felt the touch of a sweet, small hand on his brow. He half opened his eyes. He beheld a boy with an oval, pale, rather haggard face, his golden hair straying out of a wide-brimmed black velvet hat, clad in a velvet singlet and the daintiest waist imaginable, girt with a shiny belt. Dionysus' half-closed eyes did not betray his attention. He took him in front of his gold-flooded head to his tiny boots, shining radiantly on the flowered carpet. "Ah," he thought, his heart pounding, "it is Maria." Yes, it was she, his dearest. She was talking to herself, as girls were wont to do. He felt the air smell sweeter under her whispers. "I have left home surreptitiously in disguise. They kept putting me off day after day, that sawbones of a doctor, mumbling it would be dangerous for him to— Dangerous, my foot!" "Me? Dangerous?" she uttered sharply. "If he should wake up, then oh, then really, sleep, sleep," her hair. But by then his arms had taken her neck hostage. She tried to draw away in fear, but his arms still held her tight to his breast. He sat up. "Let go of me," she said, blushing. But he had enchained her, and was now caressing her white brow, causing her hat to fall and the waves of her blonde hair to stream down her shoulders. Then he took both of her tiny hands into his. She offered no more resistance. He sat gazing at them, kissing her fingers, and she offered no resistance at all. "Maria, do you love me?" "What if my name is not Maria?" she said, under the urge of some uncountable malice. "What might it be, then?" "But it is, really," she answered, with silvery tinkles in her voice. "Yet will you kindly be silent for now, for you are not allowed to talk, not yet. And do not get out of bed, for you are not allowed to do that either." She pushed him back onto the pillows. He would have liked to talk, but his mouth was stopped free from the confines of his breast. Then he opened them again to let them feast on that sweet burden, childishly making fun of his smile as well as her own surprise and fear of everything under the sun. Many a time on long winter nights, when she had become the jewel of his wedlock, when they were willingly living in the seclusion of some remote village to keep their love away from the hubbub of the world, Maria would put in an unexpected appearance in the warm drawing-room, its only light the red beams of the live embers of the hearth, in a boy's attire, as on the night they had first seen each other at close range, her slender limbs in the black velvet singlet, the same wide-brimmed hat on her blonde hair, and the tiniest feet ever in men's footwear. She drew nigh to him. her milky, diaphanous, wax-like hands even whiter against the soft black sleeves, and they would pace arm in arm in the warm semi-darkness of the room. Time and again their lips would meet, time and again they would stop in front of the mirror, their heads resting against each other, and they would burst out laughing. It was a prepossessing contrast, his drawn, fine countenance still bearing the imprints of the bitterness of a tormented youth, with just a touch of inexpressible naivete round the mouth, against her milk-white oval physiognomy, the visage of a young demon, nigh to the visage of an angel, never visited by doubt. A few concluding words. Is Dan the real hero of these incidents, or is it Dionys? Many of our readers may have been hunting for the clue to his events and his surroundings. They may have found the ingredients of his spiritual life in reality. Reuben is Ribbon. The shadow on the wall, playing such an important role, is the blue-eyed portrait. With that out of the way, what you might be goaded to consider as a fixed idea disappears in its turn. In fine, in possession of the thread of casuality, may have thought to have conjectured the meaning of his incidents, reducing them to his many dreams of a diseased imagination. Were they dreams or were they not? That is the question. Might not there be a stage manager behind the scene of life, whose existence we cannot ascertain? Might we not cut in the likeness of those dummies who, ordered to represent a great army, will strut across the stage, skirt the backstage, and come back onto the stage again? Might not all mankind throughout history be likened to such an army of itinerant players disappearing hither only to put in a new appearance thither, an army numerous to the onlooking spectator, though of the same limited number to the manager? Are not the actors the same, though plays be changed? Fair enough, we are not in a position to pry behind the stage. Likewise, might not there be some living person experiencing such moments of retrospective clearness of mind that they might seem to us reminiscences of a long bygone man? We will not refrain from quoting a few lines from one of Théophile Gautier's epistles, which render this idea more colorful. We do not unfailing belong in the country that gave us birth, and that is why we keep searching for our rightful homeland. People cast of that mold will feel themselves exiles by their own city, strangers in their own home, and belabored by a reversed homesickness. It would be easy to assign not only the country, but also the particular century wherein their real lives should have been lived. It seems to me I must have lived in the East at some time or other, so when during the carnival I disguised myself in a Muslim caftan, I feel as if I was wearing my customary attire. I have always been surprised at not understanding every word of Arabic. I must have forgotten it. Translated by Ion Georgia. Edited by A.K. Brackel. Okay, before I start reading this one, I want to actually see how long this really is, because that other one was very deceptive. Okay. Okay, so there are pretty much two main ones left. A burnout genius, Tasso in Scotland. Dumas holds that the novel is as old as mankind. He may be right. It is the metaphor of life. Have a look at the gilt-tail side of a fake coin. Listen to the idle song of a day with no claim to raise more ado in the world than any other ordinary day, and veil the poetry lying dormant in them, and the novel is all there. In a stack of dusty old books, for I have a bias for such old curiosities, I came across a more recent volume, novellas with 6 engravings. I opened it and came across a history of a Scottish king on the verge of falling prey to death at the hands of an embalmed human skull. And could you imagine whom the lithographer had to play the King of Scotland in his engravings? Tasso. The explanation is easy to provide: economy. I produced Tasso's portrait for the purpose of comparing them. It was he, trait for trait. What bizarre coincidences can occur in this earth? I said to myself, a smile lighting up my dreaminess. Could a similar history, such as that which I was reading, ever befall a Tasso? Yet I had overlooked that all objective impossibilities were none the less possible in our mind, that in the long run everything would behold, hear, think, and consider comes down to all too arbitrary creations of our own subjectivity, rather than to real things. Life is but a dream. If it was a gloomy night, a fine drizzle was pattering on the cobbled streets of Bucharest, winding, narrow, and muddy, along the cluster of low ramshackle houses which make up the most of the self-styled capital of Romania. You would find yourself trampling in the mud pools splashing you with their clammy water as soon as you ventured to put your foot down a step forward. Dingy light was filtering out through the large unwashed windows of pubs and shops, turned even weaker by the raindrops splashing against the glass. Now and then you would pass by some red-curtained window, wherein some woman showed her charms in the semi-darkness. Here and there I would spy some romantic passing by, whistling a tune under his breath. Some drunkard would give a raucous call under the windows of perdition, and the painted woman behind the pane would readily light a match to display her salve-greased face and her withered naked breast, perhaps the last means of smothering filthy passions in misshapen souls ravaged by corruption and drink. The drunkard would enter, the semi-darkness would turn pitch-dark, and the twilight of contemplation would decline into a lead-heavy midnight, when thinking that such creatures were apt to style themselves as men or women. Yet you have to make allowances, for such are three-quarters of this race, and to the remaining fourth, God only knows what scarcity of characters worthy of the name humans. From the door of an open pub I heard the shrieks of some off-key strings, ill-used by a poor gypsy urchin, his dried-up fingers clenched about a shaggy bow, while foolish slattern and a ragged, spindly gypsy, his feet in large straw-stuffed slippers, were bounding and bouncing about him. Grotesque, unsightly mirth was painted on the faces of both. There was a coffee-house next door. The rain and cold had pierced to my bones, left me no choice but to enter it. The stench of tobacco and the unrelenting clatter of the domino players took their toll on my senses. Already dazed by the rain and the cold, the grandfather clock, faithful interpreter of time, playing its metal tongue a dozen times to let the uncaring people know that the 12th hour of the night had petered out. At a scattering of tables there were foursomes of card-players, with dishevelled hair, holding cards in one shaking hand, and snapping fingers of the other before laying the stake taciturn, biting their lips without a word, and occasionally gulping noisy mouthfuls of coffee and beer in front. Some show of triumph. A youth bent over the billiard table kept chalking on the green cloth the word Ilma. He made me think he was one of Arpad's race, and that he was either bringing to light some dear sweetheart's name from the recesses of his memory, or else some Hungarian ideal from the novels of Mauricio Joke. I gave no other thought to the person of this youth, disappointed in love perhaps, but turned to thumbing through some foreign newspapers, literary and art magazines, etc. Ours have nothing to say on these matters, nor do they show the slightest concern. The youth came up to me. "I'll wait for my turn," he said with a bow. A perfect Romanian accent. He is no Hungarian. "Here you are," I said, proffering the paper, surprised at the sudden interest he roused in me as soon as I had uplifted my eyes. A man I had been acquainted with without ever having met him, one of those faces that you feel you must have seen at some time in your past without having seen it, a phenomenon which may have accounted for only by assuming some spiritual affinity. I set to observing him at length. He was handsome, demonically handsome. A brow serene and impassive like the meditation of a philosopher rose above his pale, muscular, and expressive face, and rose from above his brow. His glossy black hair, a savage mark of genius, streamed down into his well-made, sinewy shoulders. His large hazel eyes were glowing like dark flame beneath his thick, bushy-knit eyebrows, and his tightly closed bluish lips showed uncommon sternness. One would have easily taken him for an atheist poet of the race of the fallen angels, a Satan yet not wizened, hideous, loathsome, as painters would have him, but a handsome Satan, unspeakably handsome, a Satan taking pride in his fall, on whose brow God had writ genius and hell obstinacy, a godly Satan, who, endowed with life in heaven, had partaken of the most saintly light, had feasted his eyes on the most sublime ideals, had bathed his soul in the most precious dreams, to be left bleak disappointment, and engraved about his lips after his eventual fall to the earth in sorrow at having forfeited his place in heaven. His fast swelling nostrils and quick sparkling eyes were tokens of an unbridled heart and fiery character. His fine sparing frame and his iron strength as his appearance exuded a generous yet infernal power. He picked up a Romanian newspaper. At the advertising page, he read out in a low, sarcastic voice the Italian opera Huguenots. Would you rather it were Romanian? I uttered, unconcernedly. No mistake about it. Could we not have an opera sweeter and more beautiful than the Italian? You have not been here long. Right, I see, I said. What? Our countrymen, I went on, are dry, bitter, skeptical cosmopolitans. And what is worth, they boast the nice trace of loving anything foreign and hating everything Romanian. We have severed all ties with the past, whether it be language, ideas, or ways of thinking and reasoning, for otherwise we might not pass for a civilized nation in the eyes of Europe. Yet are you actually what you wish to be taken for? You do not belong here. That much I can see. Right. So there's more to it. Well, take it from me that no one here takes plains to be what he claims. You will encounter historians ignorant of history, men of letters and journalists unable to write, actors unable to act, ministers unable to govern, financiers unable to calculate, all this resulting in so much paper soiled uselessly, so much beastly yelling resounding in the theatre houses, so many cabinet reshuffles, so many bankruptcies. You consider fine men polling pro and con the existence of God, that souls in love with the tongue and customs of their forebears, then hearts in love with the expressive trait of their people, of minds concerned with the daily problems of this people, on whom we brand all the phantasmagorias of our fake civilization. Divorce and adultery strut their sickly, thickly smeared faces along our streets like live puppets. Their smile renders our women fruitless, their smile withers our men. Yet we throw parties in their honor, sacrifice our winter nights, squander away our youth, which ought to be consecrated to thriving for the ideals wished by all mankind, and to establishing a family. The women of our nation do not work. They have the means of earning their living. Men do not work either, for all the factories in the world compete with their miserable trades. As to our intelligentsia, a generation of hirelings, of smatterers, men lying in wait to seize power, a misguided intelligentsia more conversant with the history of France than with the history of Romania, scions of men blown here by all the winds of the world, for the Romanian children themselves are not yet deemed worthy of book learning. In short, men whose visage and character come down from their Greek or Bulgarian ancestors, their name only appropriated from their mother, the disgraced Romania. If only they had done any small deed to deserve that name, far from it. They hate their country more bitterly than any aliens. They consider her a place of exile, a sorry plight in their life, being, according to their lights, Romanian by birth, French by allegiance. And if France would care to bestow on our smatterers the privileges they enjoy in their unhappy homeland, they would have surely moved there long ago, every single one of them. By my honor, I continued, drawing my brow, single me out a man to write the novel of the miseries of this generation, and he is likely to fall like a bomb amid our dried-up intelligentsia, a demigod to myself and a possible savior of this country. Swerve the public opinion, swerve its bias, rouse up the national genius, its genuine and unmistakable spirit from the recesses wherein it lies a slumber, stir an all-pervading moral reaction, a revolution of ideas whereby the notion Romanian should mean more than human, great, beautiful. In short, be Romanian in flesh and spirit, he said in a throaty voice. Whoever will you have accomplished that? Everyone is cut of the same mold. All nations are responsive, whether French, Italian, Spaniards, or whatever, daring us, Romanians. Nay, strength does not lie in number. The public spirit is the making of a handful of men. It is within the power of one God-anointed brow to gather the whole ocean of human reflections into one gigantic whirlpool, which could soar from that abyss up to the clouds of wisdom surrounding the morning star, and that is what genius means. Let them face the ghost of the future, and they will become frightened. Let them envisage the end of all their path, they will turn back. Yet in the teeth of that, he added with a sceptic smile, why should we carry the burden of our generation upon our shoulders? All earthly means lead to their proper ends. If it be written that they should come to naught, then so they shall, no matter what our pains. Cosmopolitans, he added under his breath. I am a cosmopolitan myself. Oh, that the word were a prism, one only, sparkling with suffused light, though beaming forth ever so many colors. A prism with myriad of colors, a rainbow with a myriad of shades. Nations are mere shades in the prism of humankind, and the differences among them are as natural and explainable as the differences among this individual, and that, all due to circumstances, render these colors equally bright, equally polished, equally bathed in the light which shapes them out of the void of nothingness. For in the darkness of injustice and barbarism all nations are equal to brutishness, beastliness, fanaticism, and vulgarity. Yet let one streak of light shine on them, and they will display prismatic colors. A wave is the soul of one man, but the soul of a nation is an ocean. As long as the wind of misty wings, and the night of darkish air and grey clouds reign above the sea and her waves, she will still slumber, untroubled and dark, coiled on her floor, amid indiscernible whispers, whereas when the light blooms forth in the serene and blue kingdom of heaven like a fiery flower, each wave will dawn a sun on its brow, the sea herself partaking of a colour of the sky, and the limpidity of its greatness, wafting them back her deep, untroubled sleep. When the nation is kept in the dark, she will slumber voicelessly in the depth of her unfathomable power and greatness, but when liberty and civilization flutter their wings over her, superior men will emerge and let the sun bathe their brows, whence they will make it reverberate. I'm so sorry. Wait one moment. Light blooms forth in the serene and blue kingdom of heaven like a fiery flower. Each wave will dawn a sun on its brow, the sea herself partaking of the color of the sky and the limpidity of his greatness, wafting them black her deep, untroubled sleep. When the nation is kept in the dark, she will slumber voicelessly in the depth of her unfathomable power and greatness, but when liberty and civilization flutter their wings over her, superior men will emerge and let the sun bathe their brows, whence they will make it a reverberate into far-reaching beams to the commonest people, so that the bosom of the sea may be as clear as the day, mirroring the crystal clear sky on her floor. The poets and philosophers of any nation turn their eyes to the heaven above in search of rhyme and reason, and they pass their findings on to their nations. Yet there are such clouds which, once darkening the sky, are apt to spread darkness over the earth beneath. Alas, the clouds, lords over the earth, will drive their unbridled thunderbolts over the hosts of waves forever, albeit those clouds be no more than the icy gloomy exaltation of the wretched waves themselves. The clouds will pour down thunder and lightning, shielding the gilded sun beneath an iron curtain, and so long as they hold sway over the wave brows, so long as the darkness they let fall from their towering shadow will turn the depth of the sea soul into a cold and voiceless night, so long the Lord's creation is to stay wretched. The most numerous and venomous clouds are the monarchs. Next to them, though as full of venom, they are the diplomats. Their thunderbolts, which they wield to ruin, kill, and turn to dust whole nations, are the wars. Crush all monarchs. Oust their most servile hirelings, the diplomats. Abolish war, call the complaints of the nations before the tribunal of nations, and you will have the most felicitous cosmopolitanism warm the earth with its peaceful and righteous rays. The reasoning of the youth, bizarre as it was, roused my full attention, and I sat drinking it in, as it were, the words blowing forth from his thin, pale lips. His face was growing ever more thoughtful and expressive, taking on a fantastic look. I let myself drift along the smooth stream of his reflections into an other world of dreams. Do not think, he said, that cosmopolitanism, as I see it, is without its fervent followers. With these words, he produced from the inside pocket of his jacket a small sheet lithographed somewhere in the north of Germany, originated in an underground printing house from the pens of a group of young apostles of the true library, the most feasible and equalitarian cosmopolitanism. The sheet advocated a host of praiseworthy, beautiful, and youthful ideas. It called on all nations to set up a holy alliance against the despicable tyrants of the world, with a view to banishing from the affairs of the world the wicked despots, the diplomats, trampling on the catchwords of the day, and war which bleeds dry the sacred hearts of nations. O thou wondrous stream, spread thy wings wider over the face of the earth, and once become rooted to conviction, overthrow all despotic crowned heads along with the nations tyrannizing over sister nations, and do not shy at rebellion or bloodshed. An hour chimed. On the stroke of it he got up, shoved the lithographed sheet into his pocket, preferred his right hand, and put his hat with his left. My name is Toma Noor. What is yours? I told him my name. He walked out, leaving me prey to the uncanny idea of making him the hero of a novella. Back home I had hardly struck a match to light the lamp when in the dimness of the room I caught sight of the storybook with its 6 engravings. The match went out, leaving me in darkness. I say, I remarked, is it inconceivable that I might discover a Tasso in this fellow and examine him closely? The darkness about me felt like the metaphor of his name. Toma Noir. Cloud. 2. Having set for myself the task of immortalizing his noble image in the marble of a novella, I was now eager to develop a closer acquaintance with my hero. I met him several times, and as instinctive attraction drove me toward him, I invited him to visit me. I had a friend in him now, a friend who would only call on me to chide me, who would wear nothing but black clothes, who would laugh his foolish laugh in the company of people, only the more bitterly to lament at home, who professed hating people and is peevish like an old hag, so that he would make a nuisance of himself in a society that nauseated him. He had not yet asked me to visit him. Finally, one day he bestowed upon me that unexpected favor. He lived in a high-ceilinged, large but sparsely furnished room. In the corners of the ceiling, spiders were going about their silent and peaceful work. In a corner of the room with a bare floor, several hundreds of books were slumbering in random stacks, dreaming of their content. There was a wooden bed in another corner, spread with a straw pallet and a red quilt, and a dingy table in front of the bed, its top carved with Latin and Gothic lettering by the penknife of some wayward child. On the table, sheets of paper, verses, newspapers, whole or torn to shreds, short-lived pamphlets handed out gratis. In short, an incomprehensible and purposeless confusion. Yet above the books slumbering in their corner, hanging on a nail, there was a picture of the full-sized bust of an 18-year-old boy, his hair dark and long, his face marble white, his large and blue beneath thick eyebrows and long dark lashes. The blue eyes of the boy were so shiny, so clear in hue, that they made the spectator warm up to their innocent, tender, rather feminine look. It was a genuine work of art. Though the portrait of a manly clad person, his delicate white and small hands, the finely drawn, dewy, shiny, soft pallor of his face, his unfathomably deep eyes, his arched, too narrow brow, as well as his longish, wavy hair, might have led one into taking him for a woman in disguise. Who is the lady? I inquired of Toma, who was lying sprawled over his red quilt. Lady, eh? He laughed, always dreaming of ladies. I swear on my manhood. It was a man like you or me. None the less, those eyes. What about those eyes? Had you only seen those eyes once in your life, you would have imagined seeing them afresh in each bluish morning star, in each blue wave of the sea, and through each azure rift in the clouds. How beautiful the boy was, and how young when he passed away. He was a friend, perhaps the only friend I've ever had, and he loved me unselfishly and gave his life to save mine, and if my hand dabbling in painting could daub those eyes, which seem beauteous to you, you can but imagine how beauteous they may have been in real life. Beauteous may have stayed in my dark, cold, and mad soul like two bluish stars, two only, twinkling on the dome of heaven between the rifts of the clouds. My friend, you might end up as a columnist in some newspaper. When I die, I will bequeath a booklet with the story of my life for you to turn its long, weary years, sad, monotonous, and sorrowful though they were, into an hour of leisure for some coffee-house patron, for some romantic youth, or some nimity-primity girl with nothing to lose and no urge to love, though still eager to learn from novels how to write her love letters. Oh, such as you who pose as heroes of the French novelists who would love like the German sentimentalists, I rejoined, and fill your bellies like the practical English, so as you are apt to live and to be as old as the hills. And take it from me, my friend, that you, in spite of your affliction, in spite of your look so heroically pale, will outlive me and see me turned to dust. Will you lay the stakes? As I have already told you, Toma replied, let the stakes be your biographies in the form of novellas. If I should die before you, I will leave you mine. If your turn comes first, I'll inherit yours, that's all. One night I had come to Toma's. The moon was shining brightly, and there was a go candle lit inside. Toma was lying on his bed, dreaming and drawing a lungful of smoke from a long chibuk, the embers in his pipe burning in the darkness of the room like an eye of red flame glowing in the night. I was standing by the open window, dreamily contemplating the pale face of the moon. Opposite Thomas' house there stood the stately palace of one of our so-called aristocrats. By the open window on the upper floor there floated to him, in the night air, the sweet notes of a piano along with the youthful voice of a maiden breathing forth a gently perfumed fantastic prayer. I closed my eyes to let the dreams run loose. I envisaged myself in a desert, barren, wide, and sandy, like the draught itself, with a fantastic pale moon glimmering above like the visage of a dying maiden. Midnight. The desert is silent. No breeze stirs the air. The only things alive are my breath and my eyes, so that I can spy, high up in the sky, a white angel kneeling on a silvery cloud, her supplicating hands joined, chanting a divine, deep, tuneless prayer, a maiden's prayer. I half opened my eyes and beheld, beyond the open bay window, a brightly lit drawing-room, a youthful maiden, a white gown floating about her, enthralling the keyboard of a responsive piano with her thin, long, and white fingers, and accompanying the soft moans of some divine score with her sweet, tender, and low voice, as if the genius of Shakespeare, the divine Briton, had breathed out into the world another lunatic angel, another Ophelia. I closed my eyes afresh until, back in the endless desert, the white palace merged into the silvery cloud and the youthful white maiden into the kneeling angel. Then, forcing my eyes to close tighter, I drowned my dream into a sea of darkness. I shut out the images, yet I could still hear, receding farther and farther away, like a dim memory, the prayer of a maiden. The music had long ceased, yet I, willing prey to my imagination, still kept my eyes closed. When awakening from my reverie, the upper window of the palace was closed, and there was darkness in the drawing-room, its panes glittering like silver in the white moonlight. A scent of summer suffused with the translucent air, and the moonbeams coming into Thomas' chamber flooded his upturned face. It was paler than I knew it, and two moonbeams seemed to pour gold speckles on a couple of tears trickling down his closed eyes. Weeping, I managed to ask, softly and tenderly, for my own soul was brimful with tears. I imagined being loved by such an angel, with no love to reciprocate. He whispered in a husky, bitter voice. What's ailing you? I said. Ailing, you call it? He rejoined. Alas, had you the dimmest glimpse into my soul, you would shrink back in fright. For you cannot imagine what a wasteland, what a desert it is, an epitome of the idiot and barren thinking of stone-deal, dirt-mute, tomb-blind man. No feelings are apt to surge within me, yet with a chance tear trickles down my eyes. I call that bliss. You have beheld an angel pay homage to her God. Nay, that angel's earthly love is set on an unfeeling, shallow, hard-hearted demon, me. As for myself, I have no love to return. So many stars in the sky, so many loves on this earth, yet no one star to twinkle in my night, no love to warm my soul. Ever so seldom I can still hear a throb welling up my ravaged soul. Ever so seldom the breath stops short in my breast, like the wind vainly buffeting against the ruins turned to rubble by the burden of ages. Those are the moments when feelings surge up within me. Oh, those are the moments I choose to elbow the people in the streets with my eyes shut, living in either the past or the future, dreaming the dream of the infant who will talk and smile in his deep sleep to the Mother of God. I betake myself to heaven, spread out wide wings for my shoulders, and forsake the earth to abandon my soul to the divine shadows, dreams that will fly me from this world to world, and from thought to thought, dead on this earth, but how alive in heaven. Oh, that I could love! Can you realize the pain of it, of not being able to love? To pace the earth in so many appointed steps, with your sight turned inward, to toss about within the cold and narrow confines of your soul, struggling to fathom it, only to find it dried up with a stream, wasted under the sand of social draught, or evaporated from the blistering heat of a society, men thriving on their hatred against their peers. Not to love is of no consequence. Not being able to love is terrible. Thomas Noir, having put an end to his apologue of hatred and indifference, got out of bed and began pacing his large room. The moonlight flooded the marble-white face of the icon on the wall, whose eyes seemed to glow with life in the dark. "Oh, Yon," Toma burst out and kissed the icon's eyes of bluish fire. "Yon, forgive me for having fallen into a hell of hatred. You who used to preach for a heaven of love from deep down in your angelic heart." The moon had hidden behind a black rain cloud split by two red lightning bolts. The house fell into darkness, and neither shadow could be perceived any longer. The one on the wall, Yon, or the other of walking marble, Toma. "Toma," I whispered. "I'll be on my way. Good night. Beware of madness." I let myself out and went home. Toma was apparently his old self, but it was clear to me he was going to pieces. None the less, one day I reached a praiseworthy decision and put on a grave mien, though given by nature to sport rather than to mourning, so as to deliver a harangue on morale and sanity to that fellow whom I tended to take for a wasted genius. My nature played that trick on me. In my dreams I look on myself as a beastly tyrant thirsty for bloodshed, slaughter, and gold, whereas I am no better than a smoke without a fire in broad daylight. My grudge against a fellow is as short-lived as his against me, yet I could be harder on Toma. "Toma," I said, "you are going to the dogs. For God's sake, come out of your den and socialize a little before they label you as crazy." I kept droning such words or others with the same importance for days on end. He would not answer, and his face stayed inscrutable and unconcerned at my friendly though childish quips, until one day when he burst out in a loud, fiery voice, with filmy eyes and jerky breath, "Keep your counsel, you child. What is it you want? Do you think, you or the other pygmy souls about me, that you are the least inkling of who I am? What they see is the carcass of a man, when each one, according to his lights, tailors a soul for this black-clad biped. And there is their man. He's mad, the poor devil, the one says. He's a dreamer, says another. So he would have us take him for an inspired genius, the third butts in. And all these personalities, ready-made for me, have nothing to do with my real self. I am what I am, and suffice it to say that their guesses are preposterous. Their praise does not flatter me, for they praise an entirely entity, dissimilar from mine. Their jeers do not hurt me, for they jeer at an entity I know nothing of. I despise men. I've had enough of them. With that, it goes without saying, he stifled any argument that might have flashed into my mind. I chided him no longer. No use reasoning with the doorpost. One day he left Bucharest, with no word of farewell to me or any of his acquaintances. A year passed without hearing from him. One day I got a letter from Copenhagen. It read, "Friend, send me Alessandri's poems post-haste, under the initials YY," and that was the long and the short of it. I obliged. Then I left for the country, to my parents' small estate, whereupon I spent a beautiful summer, with tales and songs of yore. Yet, on leaving, I put an old charwoman in charge of accepting my letters and stowing them away in the drawer of my desk. When autumn set in, I took wing from those cold, rimy plains and took shelter in Bucharest in my small yet cozy 3/4-floor chamber. I am an incorrigible dreamer. Once I sat nodding over the tabletop, spinning gorgeous dreams, musing on those mysteries of the life of nations, and in the flow of generations which, alike to the high and the low tide of the sea, are apt to bring about their rise and fall in their awesome pageant. The weather was bleak and wailing like the musings of the dying, and the driving rain swished on the window panes. The fire in the hearth had turned to scissors, and the candle was flickering about to give up its ghost, and I seemed to hear the murmur of those old sages, while a boy cuddled in their arms could pass the winter nights recounting fantastic tales, with fairies clad in gold and beams of light singing away their untroubled lives in their crystal palaces. Long years had passed, and I still had a yesteryear feeling of entangling my fingers in the tufts of their white beards, listening to their soft, all-wise voices, to the wisdom of the bygone past, to the sages' tidings. How I wished I could have lived my life in the past, to have lived in ages when princes clad in gold and sable sat on their thrones, and time-old castles and lent their ear to the elder man's counsel. The elated Christian throng undulating like waves on the sea within the walls of the princely court, while I, amid those heads crowned with the white hair of wisdom, amid the elated people, should be their heart fired with genius, their mind ripe with inspiration, their priest for better and for worse, for their own bard. To lend more succor to these dreams, I opened some old chronicles. While thumbing through their pages, I came across a yet unsealed envelope, which doubtless my housekeeper had received and stowed away in a book. I ripped it open. It went like this: Turin, date of no consequence. Friend, you have actually sent me Alessandri's poems. Grateful. I often read Emmy, the only thing in the world able to squeeze a tear from my eyes. Really, you and your fellows, in idling your lives away, nurse a queer idea of death. You are no wiser than imagining the skeleton of some corpse and calling it death. As for me, it is a beloved thorn-crowned, wan-faced, black-winged angel. An angel it is, the angel of my dreams, such a well-known visage, the sole visage that could call forth the bliss of the world with one smile, and the melancholy of the earth with one teardrop. The visage is here no more. Those smiling lips had been closed by the smile of death, or I would rather have it like this: Death, covetous of my soul, took on the guise of the maid, tread on the earth and bereft me of my heart first, so as once she was here no more, my soul itself should follow suit. Write to me. My sight is impaired and my ears are ringing with the chant of shadows I am soon to meet in the netherworld. My angel covers the face of the sun, and her black wings gradually turn to darkness my remaining hours this side of the earth, so soon to be ended. I am to die. Write me soon, that I might still be here to get your letter. When I am dead, a strange legacy shall fall into your hands. Remember this: my body belongs to the earth, and my soul to you. Yours for the time being, Thomas Noir. A trembling tear welled out of my eyelashes, and I threw the letter into the hearth. My eyes, bleary with tears and sleeplessness, recalled in a wild vision the bluish visage of my unhappy friend, his brains incandescent with meditation, his jaws closed tight in bitterness and misanthropy, his eyes sunken and murky like the eyes of a madman. Doubtless he was dead by now. I opened the drawer of my desk and took of what few portraits I had scattered among my papers. His portrait was next to Tasso's. The missive had long lain in the chronicle. It was old. Another month passed by, and I received a parcel from a small town in Germany, the capital of a miniature king. The parcel contained a manuscript of Thomas Noir's biography. Among its pages, a scrap of paper with these words: Friend, I am not dead yet, but I am sentenced to death. My execution will be carried through soon. My dwelling is a stately palace. Magnificent guards stand at the gate. Though it be rather dark and damp, they call it prison. Do what you will with the manuscript. Farewell. See you again in the next world. Toma. This is the manuscript. I saw the dark of the world under a snowdrift, which is to say, in one of those cottages whose only claim to existence in winter is the green smoke curling up from their chimneys. My father was poor as a church mouse, one of the poorest in our hamlet. All I can recollect of my mother is a pale shape, an angel who charmed my infancy with her pained sad voice. I saw still an infant the day I noticed that mother would not answer me, having fallen asleep white-faced, distaff in hand, her lips half parted in a smile. She looked like wrapped in some deep thought. I would pull at her sleeve, but she seemed unresponsive. Eventually my father came. Some people laid her in a state on the table. All villagers came, some of them weeping. I stood there looking up at them, little knowing what had come to pass. As often as not, I had seen people lying stiff on a bed they called bier, carried away amid chanting and wailing, and had noticed that tears were welling down my mother's cheeks when they were passing by our house. The reason escaping me, night closed in. The men in the house played cards, yet mother was lying there, still white-faced and unmoving. On the third day they took her to a wooden house topped with a cross, to the church. A white-bearded old man in clothes trailing down his heels and of most diverse colors chanted something through his nose. Then they laid her into a grave, shoveled earth over her until they covered her. I returned home. For 3 days I had let no words pass my lips, and this wonder befuddled my inexperienced brain. I cannot recall ever feeling, but a terrible fear had overcome me, that I was not to see mother any more. I set to looking for her about the house and in all places. It seemed to me I could hear her low, sweet voice, which never a glimpse of herself. As soon as darkness set in, I went to a church. I saw a mound where they had left mother. A candle of yellow wax was burning in the night like a golden star through the darkness of the clouds. I lay on the grave and put an ear to the ground. Mother, mother, I cried out. Get out of there and come on home. The house is empty, I wailed. Father has not turned up all day. With your white doves are gone berserk. Come on, mother, or take me there with you. I strained my ear. Yet the mound stayed cold, silent, and wet. A gust of wind blew out of the candle, letting the pitch-black night rush into my very soul. Mother would not come. Tears started welling down my cheeks, wooden claws were clutching at my heart, and overpowered with sobbing, I was lulled to sleep by the hooting of a screech owl. And this is what I dreamed. From very far above, from those floating rocks people call clouds, I beheld a ray descending straight toward me, and a woman was flying downward along the ray, attired in a long white gown. It was Mother. She breathed out a charm over me, and I spied a white turtle dove flying out of my bosom into Mother's arms. I was lying cold and pale on the grave, as Mother had been, yet I felt then I was not only I was not only self any more, for I was the dove in Mother's arms. I turned from dove into a milk-white pretty child with a pair of wings on my shoulders. The golden ray rose up with us. We passed through a night of clouds and a day of stars. Finally we alighted in a world of fragrance and sing, a wondrous garden beyond the stars. The trees there had gems for leaves and lights for blossoms. Thousands of fiery stars glittered among their boughs in place of apples. All the paths, strewn with silver sand, led to its middle, whereat stood a resplendent white table on which wax candles were glittering like gold, and the saints seated around it were attired with white, as Mother was, as halos of rays shone around their heads. They were telling tales and singing songs of the ages when there was no world or no people, and I listened in wonder. Suddenly a cold darkness lashed my cheeks, and the eyes I had opened. I found myself on the same mound of dirt. The hailstones were hitting my face, and the black clouds in the sky were torn into thousands of shreds by fiery red forks of lightning. The hoarse bell gave sickly moans in the steeple, and the wood plate kept striking against the belfry pillars. I ran clear of the mound, wet and full of mud, and coiled down in the belfry, soaked through and with teeth chattering, my long hair fallen over the eyes, and cold weak hands drawn back into the wet sleeves. I stayed like that all night. About cockcrow I summoned my bare feet to plod the way back home in the mud. I entered the hut. There was no firewood left on the hearth. Inside it the cinders were hardly glowing, and Father was sitting on a low stool with bitter tears trickling down his unshaven, sunburnt face. "Where have you been?" he asked, taking my freezing hands into his tender grip. "Looking for Mother. Where's Mother?" His breast swelled as if to burst. He took me into his arms, hugged me lovingly, and covered my cold face with hot kisses. "Your mother, poor child," he whispered. "Your mother? You are motherless now." I was now the only consolation my aggrieved father was to know. I was the apple of his eye, the food of his thoughts, the hope of his old age. While still an infant, I would go to the curate, seating me on his knee, gave me the first lessons in reading. An overwhelming yearning, an unquenchable thirst knowledge had stirred up within me, which also was to be my doom. Had I stayed in my mountains, and let my heart take delight in Doinas, and my mind in the delusion of fairy tales, I might have been a happy man. Father sent me to school. What I learnt there I do not know. But this I know, that my days felt like a barren winter, or like a meaningless dream, of those poor children who sit at their school desks and drink a thirsting voice of the knowledge, of those for whom study is not a drudgery, for their very calling and destiny, of those with a spark of heavenly fire burning in their heads and hearts. Two categories stand out, though both have a point of common: poverty, which is self-assumed for some, and dire-straitened circumstances for others. The former will squander their money as if to gild the cobbles of Queer Street, until, turned out of doors into that street themselves, are forced to drain the cup of poverty to the dregs. The latter are left no choice in the matter. Amid the four yellowish walls, the low-ceilinged and narrow garret, forever doomed to stay clear of the touch of a broom, 5 fellows lived in the most complete and peaceful disorder. A 2-legged table stood by the only window at the other edge, propped against the wall. 2 or 3 crippled beds, a 3-legged one, another with a couple of legs, the legless third in the bare floor, so that one would lie on it crosswise, a straw chair with a gigantic hole in its seat, a few earthen candlesticks dawning proud tallow candles, an ancient lamp with a genuine pedigree down to the lamps of Greek philosophers whose wisdom stank of burning oil, stacks of books piled at random on the table, and the window ledge, and along smoky rafters the ceiling of the dingy color of burnt wood made up of the furniture of the room. There were pallets of wooden rugs on the beds, and a mat on the floor on which my fellows would sprawl when playing cards, and puffing away at the garret. We are at the age when one bellows opera airs, scans lines from the classical authors, writes love poems, wants to be taken for a romp and a womanizer, gives so much credit to one's building mustache, is so cocksure of one's winsome smile and darting eye. In fine, at that priggish trying age, one is at a loss when to name tag to. While my fellows wasted their time playing cards, making merry, and telling frivolous and funny jokes about the village jest, gypsies and priests, I sat wasting my time with my head cupped in my hands, my elbows propped against the edge of the table, unheedful of them, and reading away bloody and fantastic romances that inflamed my brains. Among my numerous colleagues, one stood out with feminine good looks. Though pale and finely built, he was foremost in our academic libations. He would drink twice as many of us yet when his companions lost the use of their legs and their tongues let loose, yelling and kissing around as if they were lovers. He alone would stay poised and smiling, the only sign of having drunk given by his customary pallor, which turned into a delicate rosiness, like that of consumption. I was not partial to drinking, yet I could not help being impressed by that boy, that angel with dark hair, with eyes of so shining and deep a blue, with such a pale and delicate face, on whom drinking had no effect whatsoever. He was poor yet mindless of poverty, always merry, a windbag full of jokes and spicy news. Though always shabby and penniless, he was a personality wanting in the self-awareness, who did not have a purpose in life, nor did he care to set himself one. Notwithstanding, his merry-making sounded unnatural to me, his often unrestrained reckless laugh no better than the sad and desperate outside pretense of a heart-wrenched soul. On a frosty winter midnight, I was lying with a book in my hand amid my fellows snoring right and left, when I heard a knock at the door. "Come in," I called out. My pale youthful friend entered, clothed in a worn-out coat, no longer up to the task of fighting the wind back. Yet his pallor was now deeper and bluish, his lips dry and closed tightly, his dark hair in an ungodly disorder. "Jon," I called, "what's wrong with you?" I took hold of his hand and looked him straight in the eyes. "Nothing," he said with a forced laugh. "Nothing. She's dying." "Who's dying, for God's sake?" "She," he blurted out, and drew me to him and rested his head against my chest to stifle desperate sobs. "Come," he said. "Come along, please." I struggled into a warm coat and walked out with him. It was freezing cold. Our footsteps made the frozen snow creak while we were running along the streets of the town. I had wrapped myself in the greatcoat up to my face. He exposed his face to the cold driving snow, pinking like needles. A high wind was blowing. Now and then he would pass a street lamp. Staring at his deathly white face, I had the feeling of pacing at the side of the shadow of a long dead man, so I kept wondering how I, a live man, could consort with a corpse, and also at the destination of that pale, skeptical, tall phantom was heading for. The otherworldly look on his face, his steps barely touching the ground, his fixed stare, his long, tattered coat reaching down to his heels, his speechless walk beside me gave me the shivers. I could not help imagining that I had befriended in a winter night stream. We got out of town, a long white plain carpeted with silvery snow on which the one moon was mirroring herself, an expanse of white thrashing ground. A fantastical winter night, flooded with silvery air in all its frosty beauty, the plain of snow, with here and there a snow-laden thicket, scarecrow, a silvery phantom on silvery plain, as far as the eye could see. We went across the plain. Far away, at the farther end of the plain, among the leafless trees in the midst of a garden, I could spy a light filtering out of a window, and heard the drowsy bark of a dog. We made our strides even faster, and presently, through the heavy snowfall, we caught sight of the house standing in the middle of the garden. We both jumped the fence, which shook off its burden of snow, and made for the lighted window. Once there, he asked me to bend down for him to climb up and take hold of the transom. He jumped on my bent back, then on to the high porch, and glued his eyes to the window. I followed suit. The room was scantily furnished, a few wooden chairs, an unlacquered wooden bed, and a piano in a corner. An old man was sitting on a chair, a girl was lying on the bed with her eyes half open, another girl was sitting on the piano. The girl on the bed was incredibly beautiful. She had ash blonde hair, her face was white as rime, her eyes blacker than two blackberries beneath long blonde eyelashes and thin arched eyebrows. Her lips were sighing out a prayer, her eyes half opened from time to time. Her temples were throbbing gently. A snow-white arm like the most flawless marble was hanging over the side of the bed, and her other hand lay limp against her heart. The old man was sitting in the wooden chair. His brow bulged, but for a few white hairs shining silvery against the light was clouded over with grief. His eyes, bloodshot with old age and unrest, were brimful with tears. His shallow, half-dead head trembled spasmodically, and his arms hung along the chair rests. The girl beside him was a rosy-cheeked angel. She was seated in front of the piano with her unmoving hands on the keyboard. Her spine rested against the back of the chair, and her head was tilted backward, face up. Her glance was directed skyward, so that her did not trickle from her eyes. What? For her face was horizontal. Her complexion was wan, and her pain a sublime sorrow. The air in the room dead and sad. The candle flame flickered as if stirred by the breath of an unseen spirit. They were all speechless as the dead. The old man sighed, grown fixed and desperate, when, unawares, the hand on the keyboard moved. As if inspired by electricity, they flew swiftly over the keys and enriched the air with divine heavenly notes. The old man cowered as if to kneel down. The eyes of the dying girl opened wide. She started singing. The notes flew now loud, now soft, and hardly audible, like the sighs of an angel's heart. It was one of those superb ladies of Palestrina, the divine maestro of lamentations. The dying girl sang on. And what a song it was, a voice like a silver bell. The notes of the piano were dying under the fingers of one girl. The notes on the lips of the other were dying too. The moribund who had propped her body on the right elbow let her head sink back ever so slowly into the pillows. The song died. Her lips became mute and bluish. Eyes turned murky, then closed forever. Their light went out. "Sophia!" Jon cried out, and fell backward from the window into the snow. I jumped down. I tucked him up in the great coat, and rigid with the swoon and the cold as he was, I took him up and crossed the snow-covered plain like a thief of corpses. Without the town, I set him down on the ground, rubbed him with snow, and breathed out what frozen breath I had left over his face, washed white as silver by the moonlight. His haggard face seemed to come to life. "Jon," I said, "get up and let's go home." Still lying down, he turned his eyes toward the house he had come from. The light was out. "Haven't we been there?" he inquired, summoning up his voice and pointing toward the house. "Nay, we had hardly left the town when you dropped unconscious on the sport." "So it was only a dream?" he said, laughing hysterically. "I knew it for a dream. It must have been, it must." His voice was broken, lamenting and benumbed with pain. "Come on home, you'll catch a cold. I say, have you not heard that divine music or seen that dying angel for that desperate old man? For God's sake, what's this raving about old men dying angels? What would you have me see in this plain? We stayed right here, far from any of your imaginings. Right you are, I'm mad. I've been dreaming. Let's go home. There's no light on in their windows. They're sleeping, fast asleep. So they're all right once they're asleep and the light's out. So she isn't dying. Nay, there's hope she'll be well again now that she's asleep. Your head is wet, I say, for the snow has melted on your hot brow." With those words, I took off my fur hat and thrust it on his head, down over his eyes, where I had noticed that the lamp had been relit. Then, with my arms under his armpits, I heaved him up, took a firm hold of his arm, and ran him to the streets of the town, so that, dizzy, blinded, and taken by force, he did not care to cast a look back in his apathy. We got home. His eyes were troubled, yet as usual, pretense of quiet had taken command over his face. The lamp had been left burning on the table, and was exhaling malodorous fumes, about to go out. "Oh, how I wish I could stay awake, and yet I'm so sleepy, Jon said, and let his body drop onto the bed. Sleep overcame him, as befalls all the frost-bitten, and thinking that sleep was the only medicine that could alleviate his plight, I let him go to sleep and started pacing the room in my bare feet, lest I should make the least noise to disturb him. Toward daybreak, sleepiness got the better of me, and I turned in beside a roommate. The next day, when I woke up, it was high noon already. He had got up and left long before. On the third day, toward nightfall, Jon entered the room with his face sad, cold, but otherwise quite composed. "She is dead," he said. "Come." Out in the street, he took my arm in his. The evening was cold, and at a distance, crossing the unpopulated street, I saw 4 men carrying a black coffin, a fast-pacing priest following, and on their tail, as if sorrow were in a hurry, an old man in a long grey, worn-out greatcoat, walking fast beside a poorly clad girl. We caught up with the pageant hurrying toward the graveyard. We walked in past the snow-covered crosses and graves and stopped by a newly dug yellow grave, which still exuded thin vapours from the heart of the earth, whereas the clogs beside it were white with frost. A burial on a winter dusk. The sexton stood with the chin of his gloomy, wrinkled face propped against the handle of his large, muddy spade. The moon was floating like a dream among the cold, wan clouds. The priest was chanting the memory eternal, and the aged father had taken off his hat. The skin of his face was sallow, fine, deep wrinkles imprinted on many years and sorrows. His head almost completely bald. It looked as if his sparse, hoary hairs had been implanted there by an untrained hand. His dry eyes had no more tears to shed. Their gaze was riveted upon the coffin, so that all the expression of his grief seemed concentrated on his half-crazy head and his lustreless, unconscious eyes. Before the Careys had laid his body into the deep shelter of clay, the old man made an instinctive sign. The lid was raised, and on the floor of the oversized coffin could be seen a white shadow with dishevelled hair, with an off-white face rigid like a marble stone, with lips drawn in, with large eyes closed and sunken beneath a withered wide brow. The old man drew closer, and for an endless moment passed his cold lips against the dead girl's brow. Her sister, a live marble statue, a spirit of grief, her face laden with sorrow, stood leaning against the tree which shook its yellow, snow-colored leaves over her cold white face, her eyes dry and closed, her mouth curved down with bitterness. Her face was still struggled hopelessly to shed one more tear, looked as if the master Canova had carved a work of his immortal genius there and set it among the snow-laden crosses and graves. Jon, deathly pale, sprang from my side in a fit of madness and pressed his lips against the dead girl's eyes. Then the lid was nailed, and a black coffin started sloping along the ropes into the darkness of the grave, and only the painful memory of Sophia lingered above the earth. I closed my eyes in a dream. Of what? I cannot recall. On reopening them, I found myself alone in the graveyard. The moon cast a light sweet as a summer's dream over the snow-covered trees that turned shiny in their silvery garb, and the old sexton, unhurried, unconcerned, and melancholy, was still there, shoveling the clods which resounded on the dry boards of the coffin. It all amounted to a dream of death in the grave. When I got back into my garret, I found Jon stretched out on my bed. His hair was spread, dark as the night, over the white pillow. His hands were joined over his head. His face was rigid, and his eyes were closed. There was a stack of dusty books on the shelves or on the table by the bed. An earthen candlestick on top of the books with a candle burning, which, left untinted, had grown a longish black wick which cast its unfeeling yellow light over the unconscious pale of the face of the youth. There was a pistol on the table. I walked on tiptoe and picked it up. Jon did not hear me in the lethargy of his sorrow. I opened the shutters and threw the pistol out into the snowdrift. Then I let myself out of the house and loitered about to calm down my dreams, my vivid impressions, and the ominous uneasiness of my soul in the clear and crisp winter night. I met Jon the next day. Now, Toma, that you have been a witness to the drama of my heart, you might as well come along and get closer to view of its actors. Let's visit the old man and his remaining daughter. Oh, Lord, I'm not selfish yet. How I wish it had happened to the other one. Hold your tongue, I expostulated. That is blasphemy. The other one might also bring happiness to some man, Jon. She is beautiful and possibly is kind-hearted. Yet, in fine, let's go. We went to the old man's home, entered the familiar warm room. The old man, speechless with grief, was sitting in the ancient armchair with his head dangling down over his chest. The girl stood daydreaming by the window with her gaze on the blooming cup of a rose which shone like fiery star beside the flowers of frost on the window-pane. An old woman was pottering about in front of the hearth. The day was so gloomy that the room was almost dark. Nobody noticed our entrance. Jon went up to the girl, took her hand in his, and asked with brotherly love, Poesis, what are you doing here? Me? Nothing. Do not speak so loudly. Father's taking a nap. Benumbed by pain and desperation, don't wake him. Sophia, our only mainstay, is no more. Meet the gentleman, Jon said, pointing to me. Ah, the gentleman, she whispered, and gave me an indifferent and distracted bow as if she had not noticed me. Jon, I'm grateful, she continued, and shook his hand as he sat down on a chair opposite hers. You were here that night. Poor boy, what a loss it must be to you. But, Poesis, I wasn't here. I am afraid I couldn't make it. This gentleman can vouch that I fainted in the snow on the way here. He was with me. The gentleman, she uttered with a sad smile, but you were here. Did I not see you at the window? So I was here, he whispered feelingly, so I witnessed her departure. Alas, Toma, you did me wrong deceiving me, letting me think I'd been dreaming. The guilt of not having come up kept nagging at my soul. But now, you let me know? You let me know. I'd have returned from there, and in that frightful state, I rejoined, Jon, had you returned, your mind would have been in great peril, your life too, for that matter, and though I'm well aware you don't make much of them yourself, I felt it my duty to care. Poor boy, so wretched, I should have lost my mind myself, she said, and bowed her head to kiss Jon's smooth brow. His brow was still unfurrowed, but a cloud of dreams spread over it. I'll follow her, he uttered quietly and feelingly, his eyes brimful with tears. I'll follow her soon. Stop that nonsense, she exclaimed. He might overhear us. She shifted her gaze to her father, who was sitting there engulfed in his mute deep grief. We lingered a little, far too little, then walked back home. A sea of rays had flooded my heart. An ocean of tenderness had intoxicated my soul, all from an image alone, Poesis. Jon had taken leave of me. I entered the house, and kneeling beside the table, stacked with books, Poesis, I whispered, carried away, I love you, and I looked for Jon with a mind to confess to him. But he had become uncommunicative and churlish, wary of any intercourse. He had railed at heaven and God and scorned men, so one might think that he was a king in rags, skeptical and cruel like Satan himself. There was no talking to him. One day I inquired the circumstances of that family. Poverty, he said, dire poverty, the lot of great souls of angels, whereas the high and the mighty of this world, ridiculous in their pomp, will ride about in their gilt carriages. A fig for those high and mighty. Why could they not count Why could they not countenance and support that aged poet who dreams his life away, who is no better than a stripling for all his genius, who is forced to let his daughters walk about the streets in their poor rags, for the silk-clad prostitution to split their sides with laughter at shabby virtue? Oh, prostitution and shame will be entombed in sepulchres of marble and coffins of lead, spread over with velvet, whereupon virtue sleeps her eternal sleep within 4 boards of timber. And what are the whys and therefores of virtue? Banish virtue and nobility to the theatre, so the ne'er-do-wells can play the virtuous, the noble, and the pure souls in a world of profligates, hypocrites, and egoists. Virtue's places on the stage boards of the theatre, far from real life wherein one must stoop to meanness to keep a body together, and so it is the honest man's wish to die happy and unbewailed by his offspring, the more so when there is a fortune left behind. Oh, I was present at scenes when the widow had the husband's will in her bosom for her sons, who searched high and low about the yet unburied for the deceased's will, with their eyes stained by crocodile tears. I was present at scenes when the wife fainted readily that lethargy in the lavish parlor might lend a becoming look to her face. Everything pertaining to man is infamous. I do not trust this malicious beast who is descended from the apes, with all the evil proclivities of his forefathers. Enough, I said. Was Sophia not a woman herself? Woman, he rejoined with a bitter smile. Woman? What is that nonsense you are saying? She was an angel of God's own making, that he embodies from his thoughts once only his timeless eternity. What is woman? The creature whose end all in life is beguiling her voice with lies, smearing her face with makeup and her eyes with deceitful tears. Oh, that sighing sphinx, how her heart is full of merriment, and her eyes with tears when she deceives you. Alas, she was no woman. I defy that name. That was Jon's mood following Sophia's death. Long after that, he, heart-wrenched and dejected though he was, would not let his eternally serene artist's brow betray his secret feelings. As to me, having set eyes on that daughter of this earth, on that fair-haired angel, I kept dreaming of her night and day, when kneeling down in front of the blackened wooden icon in our church, while the psalm reader and his lectern droned away prayers in an ancient, rather Slavic tongue, and the priest on his altar raised his emaciated hands towards heaven, I would imagine that the gloomy red icon of the Holy Virgin took on ever wider outlines on the screen. Her withered and hardly discernible visage was of rosy silver. Her hair in its gold-embroidered head-kerchief started weaving its tousled long golden tresses. Her eyes, blotted out time, seemed to shine forth like 2 bluish flower, and her sallow and closed stately lips were pursed as if about to whisper something, and the red drapes of her attire turned white as lilies before my blurred sight. In church, instead of seeing the Holy Virgin, I would behold the dearly visage of Poesis through my bitter tears of love. Who was she, and what did she do for a living? A second-class actress with a second-class company, it was her routine to act maids-in-waiting for all her carriage and poise that bespoke this tragedian. The theatre house stood in a suburb of the town, a wooden contraption erected in a clump of trees, which, together with another cluster stretching farther on, made up a park of sorts, or rather a grove. Through a back door one could catch a glimpse of the disorder on the stage before the performance, with makeshift thickets, an assortment of green and red tatters standing for rose bushes, upturned benches scattered about, backgrounds of painted cloth hanging in mid-air, and farther on the back stage littered with furniture piled up in random heaps, candelabra over chairs, tabletops on settee cushions, their legs pointing up to the ceiling, mirrors facing the wall, wrapped up carpets, mound of stage properties on either side, rows of plank booths, the so-called dressing rooms wherein the actors and actresses put on their costumes and makeup. I climbed onto the stage and elbowed my way through the bustling crowd of hard-swearing stagehands to the plank booth I knew was set aside for her. I peeped in through the chinks in a plank. Poor wretched girl, she had hardly had the time to get accustomed to the loss of her sister, and now there she was, about to impersonate a merry girl. Her off-white face was still in want of a little more white powder, and a touch of pink lent her complexion a rosy blush like the light spread over the twilight sky. A flimsy gauze chemise covered her bosom, which, far from concealing, showed to advantage the most flawlessly rounded, the widest and smallest breasts, as if carved in silvery marble by the hand of a blind sculptor. Had he a pair of eyes gazing out of his head, he might not have been beyond smashing his own work in a fit of jealousy. She was to act the part of an angel in a meaningless vaudeville. De ex machina. whose only enjoyable and entertaining quality lay the appeal and beauty of the players. Having fixed a pair of white wings to her shoulders, she completed her dressing up, and now that the orchestra struck the notes of the overture to the norm of prayer, she let her body subside on a chair, tilted her head backward, and joined her hands, assuming such dreamy poise that it would have been no marvel if, abducted by the heavenly tune, she had taken wing herself, gentle, quiet, and sad, like the soul of an angel, floating up to heaven, gliding smoothly thither on her silver, white wings. I stood there, feasting my eye on her. The voluptuousness of that marble-white breast, the dreaminess of that pale face, gazing toward heaven, the dainty white hands joined in supplication, the round and naked youthful arms hanging limp by her sides in a symbol of despondency, her body yearning to kneel down, the wings about to spread out and raise her clear off the ground, all were unmistakable traits of one visage, one sweet, beauteous, and ideal body, poesis. Presently the prompter's dumb bell broke the quiet off stage, and I stole away from the booth lest she notice my prying into her beauty in its most appealing and divine guise. The next moment she emerged from her booth. Noticing me, she vouchsafed me a smile, and I set to racking my brains for a not too clumsy compliment. "What brings you here in this unbreathable atmosphere of oil dyes and lamp oil?" she asked me, still smiling. I turned red in the face and lowered my eyes like a schoolboy caught red-handed at making proper paper toys surreptitiously under the cover of a desktop. Yet I managed to pluck up what spirits I had, for willy-nilly I had to. "You!" I exclaimed. "Me? You must be poking fun at me," she said, yet I could see she had blushed crimson for all the white make-up smeared over her face. The back cloth hadn't been lowered, and we found ourselves alone behind it. "Ever since I saw you," I continued, and possessed myself of her hand, "my eyes are dazzled by your light, and my heart has shut the world out, brimful with love for you. I've forsaken my dusty books, science and poetry alike, and the ideals of both since you came into my life. You wouldn't know, nor can you guess at how dearly I love you. Everything that looks worthwhile to me today is all here in yourself. Flower and bird, spring and winter tale, the whiteness of the north and the bloom of the south. I've rediscovered all the lost ideals in one and only image, which is yours. My curtain call," she blurted out, flurried and moved. "Do you love me?" The question out of my bosom. I knelt down and clung to her. "Yes," she replied, flurried, smiling and blushing at the same time, and hurried off whither her duty summoned her. And presently I listened to the velvety youthful timbre of her voice, enriching the stage, and to the audience clapping their hands in the appearance of that earthly angel. I had been staying there, behind the back cloth on my knees, with hands locked together, my soul drinking in the silvery notes of her barely audible voice, beside myself with bliss. In that ecstatic mood, with my eyes staring at the ground, as if enraptured by some sweet memory, my soul longing for one more note of her voice, which was now silent, I heard a rustle of a dress, and uplifted my eyes. She had come back. There was an infinite pity and an infinite love in her eyes, as she stood there, looking down at my kneeling body. "Poesis," I whispered, struggled to my feet, and reached my arms towards her. In an instant she was a marble statue resting on my chest, her naked white arms encircling my neck. My lips set to searching for her face and cuddled against my breast, but presently she disengaged an arm from about my neck, touched the back of her hand against my thirsty mouth, turned her back on me, and vanished smiling. My longing arms reached in vain for her departing shadow. She was flying away. She returned. "My friend," she said with a grave mien, stroking my brow, "you may walk me home. My father plays the cello in the orchestra. There's still a long time till the fourth act, and he can come by himself for once." She went back into the booth and called out, "Bye for now," and a rosy blush spread over her face, as if she were ashamed of her words. She emerged in no time, wearing her street clothes, a becoming short fur coat wrapped about her shoulders, and a velvet hat on her head. "Here, help me with this bundle," she said, and gave me a bundle to carry. We left the theatre by the back door, and before long were at the edge of the pane whence we could see the aged musician's cottage, whose window panes were shining in the night like a pair of silverware plates. The plain was so silent and white, the air so crisp and clear, my love so ardent and dark. I walked by her, the warm, youthful soul of a child, whose feet were barely touching the snow-carpeted ancient plain. She meant everything to me at that moment, my ideal, my angel, my woman, on imagining that the tender-hearted, sweet girl walking by my side might call me husband at home in the future time. An incomprehensible charm. The warmth of a room, hearted in winter time, a balmy, wholesome, and familiar draught of air flooded the cold, barren night of my soul. Scores of times I had to refrain from holding her tight in my arms with unrestrained, childish love. Scores of times, divining the workings of my soul, she would give me a reproving, sly smile, flouting my intentions. Eventually we arrived home. Graceful and frolicsome, she jumped sprightly over the fence and vanished laughing among the snow-laden trees in the garden. I followed suit. We let ourselves in by the back door and found ourselves in a dark hall wherein the only lights came through the keyhole of a door opening into the lighted room. We entered it. The open grate of the hearth radiated reddish light and warm air, and a pervading fragrance of freshly roasted coffee rendered the air and light in the room even drowsier. The only change I could notice was the piano moved alongside the wall with a keyboard facing the window, on whose ledge were two pots with blooming red rose and a silver lily, the latter one faced like a maiden love. She rid herself of her fur coat and remained in a bodice dress of grey silk. The sight of her slender waist and the gentle drowsiness of all her slow gestures fired my eyes with a boundless and incomprehensible desire. I pulled an armchair by the fireplace, which radiated an enervating heat, and resorted to mild force to seat her in it. The red firelight was washing her face and pale brow. Her bittersweet, lenient smile, her drooping lashes, bid me kneel at her feet, and take both her hands in mine, and feast my thirsty and yearning eyes on her countenance. I put my hands about her neck, and started rising from the floor with a mind to steal along a bewitching kiss from her lips, but that roused her from her gentle, drowsy dreaminess. Her eyes opened slightly. She held me back gently at arm's length, stroked my brow, and smiled. "You reckless boy, let go of me." She freed her hands from my clasp with a graceful show of strength, seated herself snugly in the armchair by the piano, and raised the lid. I followed her and knelt down again, put my arm around her waist, and nestled my intoxicated head on her lap. She let me have my will, rested her hands on the keyboard, and started strumming the keys with melancholy liveliness. It was a moving, affectionate, and doleful waltz by some German maestro, the sound of which made me even dizzier and more distracted. It was not mere notes in harmony that I heard, but rather a melancholy and voluptuous hum receding ever so softly out of hearing. I uplifted my loving eyes to her face and flushed with the heat and the clasping of my arms. It was such an arduous task to keep my intoxicated senses in check, but my eyes were afire and my embrace a mad fury. "Poesis," my voice was thick, "I love you." "Hush, there's my father," she choked back a cry, stood up, and rested her right hand on the window-sill. I left my kneeling position at the unexpected news. She culled the lily from its pot at the window, her eyes closed so tightly, and the kiss she gave the flower was so ardent, that for a split second the silvery whiteness of the lily seemed to turn red. Then she proffered it to me with her left hand, her serene countenance beaming love. I kissed the lily, neither whiter nor purer than the visage of my chaste bride, a fiery kiss, an eternal kiss. Then I bolted for the door, but stopped short in the doorway, and looked back in a rapture at her slender, tall frame, watching my departure with a hand resting on the piano. One more glance over the shoulder, and I walked out, for now I could hear distinctly the old man's footsteps creaking along the frozen footpath in the courtyard. I let myself out by the back door, crossed the garden, jumped over the fence, and swept across the plain as if I were a gust of wind, burning with blissful love. And back in my humble cell, I felt as happy as a kind strayed among my snoring roommates. Seated by the smoky lamplight, I wrote some lines of verse which I came across later, strayed among my sun-dried papers. Here they were, word for word, as I wrote them at the time. When at night my soul ecstatic vigil kept, my guardian angel alighted my dream, enfolded in a cloak of clouds and moonlight, airing my head with his seraphic wings. But as he saw you clad in that dress, pale white, a child in longing and mystery wrapped, before your sparkling eyes that angel departed, just as the sea sleeping deep, calm, undisturbed, in its endless bosom of light and affection, divinely reflects the divine source of light, shedding golden rays onto her vast breast, so too you, my darling, you sweet dream of love, can change into daylight the night of my soul. With your dark stars, with your faint smile, my happiness knew no bounds. In my endless daydreaming, I took every flower and every star for a sister, the gentle sisters of me beloved. Oft in my excitement would I forget the name of God and dream as I was a world with its myriads of stars and myriads of flowers, with the black mountains and green vales, the moonlit nights and sun-scorched days, and I bid them all bow in homage with the incense of their lives to a pale silvery shadow that was to me the center of that world, a shadow climbing down the sun rays as if on a golden ladder, the shadow of Poesis. The whole of eternity often seemed too short for my worship, and clad in the shroud of death though I was, I wrestled against hoary time, tore off his wings, and sentenced him to non-existence. At other times all tongues sounded stupid, and all words meaningless. Any word that did not ring of her sounded foolish, and foolishness it was to puzzle over it. My mind had ceased interpreting the meaning of words. Dazed and mad, in every concept I imagined to see the pale contours of her divine shadow. But this love, bashful as that of silvery doves, was doomed to happen in the year of sorrow 48. Wherefore should it have been born at that of all times? Wherefore could that pitiful year have passed without loving? All Transylvania was seething, and maiden spring bestowed pretty flowers and golden days all over it. Yet if a careful diviner had chanced to scour the blooming plains of Transylvania, his eyes would have beheld the sunken and sightless orbs of a corpse. The bloodthirsty archangel of revenge seemed to hover over the bewildered and sickly air of the world. The Hungarians contemplated once more, and for the time, raising the Romanians from the face of the earth by union and pitchforks, and deluded themselves they could Majorize the cold stone and the virginal well, along with the majestic ancient forest, and instill the idea of Hungarian union into the hoary and awesome brains of the mountains, brains which were beginning to be fired, nay, had already been, with a grand sublime idea, liberty. They thought, and it was the last time they did, that the ancient and storm-beaten guards of the forests of Transylvania, the rock-headed mountains, were bound to go on sleeping their eternal sleep, and would not start awake at the mendacious howls of the mad hounds that fabricated empires with 60 million Hungarians, which fortunately for the world existed only in the short-sighted phantasmagorias of their deranged brains. Yet the kingly sentries did start awake. The roar of the forests blowing off the rust on the iron wings of the Romanian eagle had stirring it from its centuries-old slumber frightened the enemies. And today the slumber of this eagle still frightens the ones unable to guess at what multiplied powers the slumber might lend to its natural strength. Oh, our enemies have always feared us, as testified to by their history-long conspiracies, openly or behind our back, against our backs, against our very existence, though all those conspiracies resulted only in rendering us hard as rocks and enduring our splint stones on this land. Had they set us on the same footing, had they opened wide the gates of their own privileges and rights, there is no telling whether enervated or pampered we might not have become Hungarians. Countrymen, thank you for your centuries-old hatred and for making us eager for an opportunity to repay our gratitude in a way you will never forget. As the homeland you call Hungarian, one must needs have the impudence of a Hungarian to call it any longer, as one must needs share the ignorance of a Rossler who calls us immigrants, albeit the immigrants be 10 million strong, whereas the site of the immigration has a population of only 800,000. In fine, on one side stands the impudence of the Hungarians, on the other the priggish German ignorance, either one necessary to foster the grand delusions of the Hungarian and claim the unworthiness of the Romanians, and what are their misshapen ideas brought into Transylvania? The blind death that mowed them down in thousands, as well as the ferocious hatred of the other nations against all things Hungarian, and they had the cheek to preach on behalf of the Magyar people, who, no less kind and lenient than any other people, seemed destined to live in peace and brotherly love with the Romanians, but for the vainglorious drivel that fired their brains. Yet they purposely misinterpreted the leaves of the Book of Fate and smeared its verses with blood. The Hungarians twisted and garbled God's peaceful sentence, "Live in peace, for you are the only heterogeneous nations, and amid an ocean of Pan-Slavism," and so they brought about their doom. They willed it, not we. All over country, the Romanian anti-unionist movement was seething. There had been a preparatory meeting on St. Thomas's Sunday, and a great tricolor banner, "Virtus Romana Rediviva." Jon and I had participated in all those manifestations of the nation's life, eternally unique in their kind. Then we returned to the fomenting town of our studies, yet whoever could apply his mind to study. Our brains were afire, and Jon's haggard face had partaken of the nation's great love. I called on Poesis. The night was clear and diaphanous. The moon's silvery and enamored rays melted like snowflakes in the shadowy verdure of the trees and thickets scattered about the garden. I sat on a bench, immersed in thoughts, and God only knows why my thoughts should have been melancholy. I sat there in her garden, my joined hands resting lazily on my knees, with my brow down and my hair falling freely over it, thinking of matters I cannot recall under the moon, who, floating slowly among silvery clouds scattered over the blue sky, was immersed in her own train of thoughts and dreams and things past human ken. A gentle swish along the sand walk startled me from my reverie. It was she. A negligée like a silvery mist bathed her tall, lit, and slender frame in its fantastic and diaphanous whiteness, giving her the look of a sea elf. She came up to me when our eyes met. She seated herself tenderly across my knees and kissed my eyes, which closed in a deep dreaminess, for I could not bring myself to believe it was she, the fantastic fairy of my long-spun dreams. I took her blonde head in the cup of my hands and gazed at it. How sad that head was! How pale that face! How sunken those blue eyes! Poesis, I said, are you unhappy? How pale you look, my child. Are you suffering? Are you sobbing? Oh, that I were the only sleeping soul! But let that pass. Toma, this may be the last time we are together. The last time, you say? Poesis, you must be raving. The last time? Alas, my boy, if you knew how wretched I feel, she blurted out, her eyes brimful with tears, and brushed aside the black hairs over my brow with her white hands and scorched my clouded with her lips sucked in with crying. I'm so wretched, yet I can't tell you why. If there is one thing I dare entreat you in the name of your mother, of that pure angel, it is to forget me. Forget me, at least until the day I die. When I'm dead, for God's sake, Poesis, what's all this? What's wrong with you? What's wrong? That I can't tell you, but let us forget it all. How handsome you look this night, as if your hair were made of ebony, and your eyes of two black diamonds. How handsome my beloved is. My beloved, not mine any more. Not yours? Poesis? Are you not mine, my own blonde angel? There, this comes from having cried your eyes out while I was away, which is no reason to think I'm not yours any longer. Poesis, this will be my homeland as well as the homeland of our enemies. You'll be my wife, and my parental home, the mother of my children. Oh, how pretty you are! How dearly we'll love you, both I and my aged father, the stone cutter. You'll brush the dust off the wrinkles of my brow. Your kisses will enliven it, and I'll love you as dearly as I love my homeland and as I love God. Poesis! The night butterflies were swarming over the flower beds. The blooming trees reached their boughs laden with white and pink blossoms down over our brows. The spring's intoxicating perfume instilled its bracing virginal breath. She kept her eyelids half closed and did not spurn my melancholy caresses. The moon alone was watching like a sweet silvery sun over our unquenchable love. On the morrow I got happily out of my straw-stuffed pallet, wrapped my shoulders in my greatcoat, and set to loitering about the streets of the town, a Romanian tricolour badge in a buttonhole, the wide-brimmed hat, and I let my walking-stick trail on the fine gravel of the streets, and whistled an air under my breath no matter which. Suddenly, I heard the monotonous notes of funeral music behind me. I turned my head, arrested my gait, took off my hat, and due compassion clouded my countenance. A carriage followed the bier, and I saw a long silk dress and a pale face framed with golden hair, a face so well known to me that I could hardly mistake it for any other. It was she, Poesis, yet that could not be. The deathly pallor, the fair hair, the visage, all belonged to her, yet in such pomp. She, who was so poor? What about the second carriage? I could not believe my eyes. Two of the profligates of the town were laughing aloud in the funeral procession, donning tight riding breeches, red-braided, bluish waistcoats, yellow jackets, wide-brimmed hats, and a couple of watch chains across their chests. Their shallow, apish faces were distorted in the cynical laughter of skeptical lechers, in a procession that had nothing to invite merrymaking. Dazed and no longer master of my thoughts and feelings, I followed the procession to the church. There was a crowd of people outside, and inside of it I elbowed my way inside ruthlessly. There must have been something strange in my unfocused eyes, in my not having taken off my hat on entering the church, and my doubled fists, and my teeth gritting, and my savage laughter, which made me the center of attention. A madman! Someone whispered in such a carrying voice that I overheard him, yet in the gloom of my affliction that voice sounded unreal, for I was not aware of the world of men. I felt all by myself in the spasm of a nightmarish vision, for all I could discern were a coffin floating in the air, and my aggrieved beloved who followed the coffin, leaning for support on the arm of the man. The fiery eyes of the wax candle started dancing in the gloom of the church like as many dingy red stars. The body of the lidless coffin seemed to grimace at me, and on the cold black walls of the church appeared unsightly faces with black eyes and heads distorted by mad fury. "Who's that man?" I roared, in spite of the demon clutching my throat in the vice of his wooden fingers. I rushed for him, but a sexton crushed his fist against my brow so forcefully that I saw stars and fell on my back in a stupor. I cannot recall how long my stupor lasted, but when I came to, I was lying on a stone bench in a corner of the church, and Yon stood watching over me. "Who's that man?" were the first words I could utter. "Who? Guess who? Her rich lover. A count or some such thing. Leave her to her devices. She's a woman. Did you expect her to be different? Let's go." He lent me an arm and helped me to gain my feet. Leaning on his arm, we walked out the door, where the old deacon lingered in the company of 2 or 3 ragged beggars. We walked up the streets to Yon's place. His chamber was small and dark, the darkness made deeper by a narrow wall hung over with black woolen curtain, with a white cross painted in its centre. Yet all in all, its chamber smacked of a fine, artful elegance, at variance with its rather soiled and ragged clothes. His gilt-bound books were arrayed in orderly rows on a red tablecloth alongside a litter of pencils, brushes, palettes, and colours, in large boxes or smeared on seashells. I slumped on a chair and cast a cold glance at all those who would have struck me as strange had I been in a different mood. To one side of the black curtain hung a white tassel on a white cord. Jon drew a chair close to mine, sat on it with his chest touching my right shoulder, then put an arm around my neck and the other around my chest, rested his brow against my right shoulder, and whispered in my ear, "As of now, I break all ties with life, my friendship with you, my love with the shadow, the memory of Sophia. Toma, as of now I do not belong to myself any longer. I go away and leave you here. But before leaving, I will confess to you the folly of my life, for you never knew what I painted. For you never knew that I painted." He stood up, pulled the white cord on the black curtain, and there on the wall I saw a creature that I thought to be alive. Indeed, it seemed fully alive to my dimmed sight. It was Sophia, the ash-blonde hair dressed in a stately bow over her brow, the deep-set, shiny black eyes, the finely drawn pale, the bluish thin lips. It was Sophia, indeed, in all her unique beauty, fair as only the south can breed. Jon joined his hands and gazed in ecstasy at the lifelike portrait. His eyes were flashing fire, his lips a-quiver, and I sat there and let my numbed sense take in that unbelievable scene wherein the portrait looked alive and real, whereas Jon seemed nearly dead, with only his fiery eyes burning alive in his head. Poor alive shape, poor work of my imagination, I strived to bring you to life out of the chaos of my pain and desperation. How painful to crush you now against the cold rock of my awakening, a crush to my past. He produced a small sharp dagger from his breast pocket, knifed the portrait with a diagonal cross, and the torn canvas folded over the gilt wooden framework to all four sides, leaving bare the wild wall behind it. His eyes were lusterless and his smile bitter in the aftermath of the cruel struggle. I've been thinking this story actually reminded me of that one song. Like, in particular, the video. There's a video. No, it's not that one. It's the, the one that has a gun as the title of this. Beretta. Is that? I think that's the name of it. Maybe I should just double check that. That's what happens if you have ever, like, there's actually more than one song it reminds that his prose and poetry remind me of this song. Yeah, it's Beretta. So in Beretta, there's this painter who can't get over his lost love, and he keeps trying to paint new women, but he can't. And when it's revealed that all the paintings he's ever been doing are all the same face, it's all her. I can't tell you how it ends because it's really dark. But yeah, this actually, it probably is inspired by this. I'm thinking it might be. Anyway, I'll read. I could swear, though, too, that something like this also happened in some Motan's videos. Not quite like this, but I mean... Yeah. Anyway, let me find my place again. He just stabbed the painting. Knifed the portrait with a diagonal cross, and the torn canvas folded over the gilt wooden framework to all four sides, leaving bare the wall behind it. His eyelashes were lustreless and his smile bitter in the aftermath of the cruel struggle. Toma, he said, I am leaving, yet I will not that you follow me. Stay here in my home. You will live here comfortably and free of intrusions, as I have lived, totally addicted to painting, my hobby and my madness. A cab has long been waiting for me. Farewell. Consider that you've never had my friendship, and be of good cheer. Farewell. He shook my hand once more and went down the stairs. I slammed the door on his back, fell onto the bed, sank my face onto the pillows, and let my soul fall prey to the cruelest pain. How long I lay unconscious like that I cannot recall, though when waking up it was the dead of night, and the clock was chiming one of the small hours. I lit the candle, rushed to Sophia's torn portrait, and set to patching up the canvas, but all my endeavors were to no avail. There was an armful of firewood scattered by the hearth. I thrust it into the stove, starting a roaring fire, and drew a small red sofa by the fire, hoping to put an end to my life. I put out the candle and lay before the flames, watching them lick the mouth of the hearth with their dragon tongues. Staring at the flames with my legs sprawled and my head against my chest, it dawned on me that my whole life had been no better than a fantastic madman's dream, without sense or purpose, and in the tongues of flame I envisaged all my thoughts, my days, and my dreams of happiness burning to ashes, when nothing remained of the fire but a large heap of coals and a few bluish flames. I covered the vent hole, lay back in front of the ashes, closed my eyes, and waited for the sleep of death. Outside the wind gave blood-curdling howls, and the old drizzle kept pattering on the window panes, as if wind, clouds, thunder, and rain were celebrating a savage wedding feast in the dark dimness of the cloudy night sky. Despite the dull yet piercing whistle of the wind, I fell asleep and felt my brain slowly growing numb with the carbon. I had died. All at once I found myself in an emerald green forest with rocks of myrrh and virginal saintly wells. Angel-voiced nightingales were caroling on the trees. Diaphanous blissful shadows were wandering along the walks, receding into the dark verdure of saintly groves. In the far distance I spied a golden grove, whose rustle of leaves was chanting a soothing and gentle tune, like the swish of slumberous waves on the sea. Among those saintly white shadows I alone had a body. I kept wandering through the forest until I reached a river with silvery ripples. The waters in midstream encircled an island with woods and gardens, amid which a tall church raised its spherical domes skyward, all embossed in gold and so glittery that the sun in this clear sky mirrored himself into its main dome. A golden boat was rocking by the bank, stepped into it, and tearing the silvery ripples of the river with the oars. I reached the beach of the island. All was there. All was silent there. No birds were warbling, only from the inside of the church were wafted out a soft, sorrowful, and mournful dirge, like the choked wailing at the bedside of a dying man. I entered the church by its gold portals. Its floor was of milk-white marble, its tall arcades olive gold, as were its columns, the screen with tall wan icons of saints and angels of otherworldly beauty looked like gold leaves on silver canvases, and the altar, a marble table with the last sacraments. I have to do this too. There are multiple things here that also remind me of other ones, so I'm just going to write them down here. So there's that one. And then there's another one. There we go. Sorry. Oh, actually, no, there's another. There's another that also... Oh my goodness. Although, just slightly. It's just one moment in the video that's, like, very similar. But it's... all embossed in gold and so glittery that the sun in the clear sky mirrored itself into its main dome. A golden boat was rocking by the bank. I stepped into it, and tearing the silvery ripples of the river with the oars, I reached the beach of the island. All was silent there. No birds were warbling. Only from inside the church there wafted out a soft, sorrowful, and mournful dirge, like the choked wailing at the bedside of a dying man. I entered the church by its gold portals. Its floor was of milk-white marble, its tall arcades all of gold, as were its columns. The screen with tall wan icons of saints and angels of otherworldly beauty looked like gold leaves on silver canvases. In the altar a marble table with the last sacraments. There was no one on the church floor, only the nuns chanting funeral dirges up in the choir. By a side door, holding white wax candles in their hands, emerged a pageant of haggard figures with long white veils drawn up so to cover their heads. So was they were that one could hardly tell their faces from the white of their garb, but only the lustreless glassy eyes swimming sadly in their sockets. They paced ever so slowly to the center of the nave. I took cover behind a cold column in fright. I singled out one of the shadows, a white-haired old man with a haggard face, wild eyes, and sucked-in lips. His stare focused on the flame of the candle burning away in his hand. I could tell I had seen him before. A pale girl with bluish marble face stood leaning against a column right in front of me. She smiled sadly and beckoned to me. It was Poesis. Poesis, I cried out, and opened my eyes. The fire was not out yet, but the window was open, and high wind was howling in through it. I thought the wind had opened it, and I went there to close it back up. But when I turned my eyes, I saw. Sooner or later the body would have healed, but the real illness, the all-consuming illness, lay in my heart. I threw into the fire all things reminiscent of that traitoress, and they were burnt as my heart, nay, my very life, had been burnt out. Pale as a ghost, I would drag my feet along the city walls, more dead than alive. My jaws had drawn in, the whites of my eye had turned sallow, and the blacks were murky and lustreless. I let my hair untidily over the unbrushed, slimy collar of my jacket, and I wandered in that guise among an alien world wherein I did not belong, and if I chanced to stray cover into a public garden with flushed, merry faces giggling around and taking cover behind the trees, I tended to take them for malicious, ephemeral spectres jeering at my pain. At other times I imagined I saw grinning corpses around them, the more appalling and ghastlier by the contrast between the truth of death and the smeared likelihood of life. Occasionally I found myself gaping in a mirror and making faces when I came to my senses from such a vacant mood. I was terrified at the certainty of having gone mad, and scared by my own self. Uppermost in my mind was the fear of madness. I was afraid lest I should go mad. I often stared vacantly at the sun with my naked eye for long hours, until, blinded by its scorching light, I could only discern a bluish-red chaos which seemed to daze and twist me about until I found myself sprawled on the grass in some field. I was stultified, absurd, senseless. I often lay like that, buried in the fragrant grasses, a swarm of tiny blue summer butterflies fluttering over the flowers, the hot sun beating down on my bare head. That's another one. Kind of. The thing of the butterflies. Oh my goodness. Where was I? Amazing. It's amazing. Anyway, where was I? A swarm of tiny blue summer butterflies fluttering over the flowers, the hot sun beating down on my bare head, all things beauteous as only summer days can make them, with me alone, without a single sane thought in my head. For whole days I would scour the plains until I came across the river, Once there, I stood on the wooden bridge, gazing at the yellow waves floating by and gurgling swiftly, murky waves like my barren soul, murky and gloomy like my dead heart. I could not bear the sight of the crystal clear water and the wells, and the chancing near one. I would set to stirring it up with my stick until, muddied by the dun earth, it turned into a live icon of my thoughts. Yet things could not go on like that indefinitely. One more month of such a life and I was aware I should be dead. Not that I cared if I died. I might even be happier down there in earth. But if I had aged father to think of, and my death would have meant the end of him. A fine summer day I packed my belongings in a bundle, hung it on the end of my stick, and set out straight for the high road. I walked between cornfields. The fragrant corn was ripening in the blistering sunshine. I had cocked my hat on the crown of my head so as to leave my brow free and uncovered, and set to whistling a carefree and soothing tune, while shiny large beads of sweat kept trickling down my brow and along my cheeks. Happy as the day was long, I walked at a steady pace with never a moment for rest. The sun was skirting the horizon, the air grew cooler, the fields seemed to fall aslumber from their indefatigable rustle. Along the country road people were returning from their toil, balancing their sides on their shoulders. The girls carried posts and pails in both hands. Braces and oxen pulled slowly at their yokes, and the carts creaked, and their peasants walking by their side smacked their whips and shouted their eternal hoy-ho. The Maresh was aslumber with slumber between its banks. The boat bridge grunted under the weight of the carts. In the far distance I caught sight of my native mountains, ancient giants with rocky brows, soaring up through the clouds and shining above them, surely, hoary, and gaunt. One by one stars lit and twinkled in the blue boundlessness of the sky, some higher, some lower, and the moon, their fair queen, pale as a bride, floated like a silver sickle among thin whitish clouds. The cartloads of timber coming down from the mountains creaked and grunted. The peasants lay on their bellies atop the loads or walked beside the carts whistling, and their duenas sounded ancient and sad like the reminiscences of the times of yore. All the charms of a summer night were there. The white moon and the golden stars, the melancholy pipe and the slumberous fields, and straight ahead the rocky old giants, the mountains that now looked as if crowned with stars a-twinkle over their brows. I followed my way steadily along the white paths, crisscrossing the cornfields, some of them still green, and I gained the cool of the mountainside. There I followed a rocky mountain footpath. On several hilltops I could see blazing campfires and men seated around them, or hear an occasional alpenhorn booming its brassy pain from the thick of the forest, and wrapped the mountain shoulders in their dark green mantle. Beside some other fires I saw girls and lads dancing, and here and there in the forest the braves would whistle or play heartfelt and homesick duenas on tree leaves. On and on I walked along an upsloping narrow path winding along the rocky bluffs. The path had crumbled in some places and was blocked in others by boulders tumbled down from the peaks and stuck right there in its middle. I would jump over the gaps in the boulders and continue my way heedless of the moon that had set, the fires that were dying out, and the songs that had ceased, until the rising sun spread a faint blush over the east. The crisp morning air filled my lungs, and I felt my throat to be numbed with its chill, and eventually I saw my village with its small thatched cottages, scattered over the story heart of the mountains, as if it were a village of eagles' nests. I walked through its center, past the small wooden church, and at the far end of the village I stopped by my father's poor hut. The little window pane was lighted. I drew back the wooden bolt on the cracked door and let myself in. A few brushwood embers were still glowing in the hearth, and I saw father sleeping on a bed of planks raised as high as the hearth. Behind the oven was mother's bed, now covered with a strip of carpet. Above it hung a smoked old icon of the Holy Virgin, and a small oil lamp was flickering below the icon. I could not bring myself to wake father, so I lay down on mother's bed and fell sound asleep from exhaustion. At the break of dawn, when the day was still young, the cock crowed on the roof, and I saw my father getting out of bed, dipping his hands into the tub of water to wash his face, making the sign of the cross while mumbling a prayer under his breath, then picking up his hammers from under the bed and letting himself out without a look back, so he did not see me sleeping behind the oven. It was high noon when I woke up from my deep, untroubled sleep. Somebody was fidgeting about the house beside the hearth. It was a cousin who was feeding brushwood into the fire and cooking. "Is it you, Fanitza?" I called out. I got out of bed, took her head into my hands, and kissed her. "Oh, goodness me!" she exclaimed, smiling. She covered her lips with her fingers and looked at me from head to foot. "You're a regular man now. Look at you, with a beard and mustaches. I say, cousin, you're yellow like a corpse. Is it the pangs of love?" "You have no inkling," I said, looking at her in the shiny, innocent eyes. "Nor can you have any way to know how I have suffered." My, how pretty my cousin looked! Her face was white and her cheeks rosy, her thick chestnut hair was plaited into two pigtails falling down her back, smooth hair parted in the middle, large hazel eyes that gazed at me in wonder, arched knitted eyebrows, a fine ladylike nose, a well-rounded flawless chin, and when laughing 2 dainty dimples appeared in her cheeks. Her white peasant's blouse was embroidered and wide-sleeved. Her shirt was new and clean, her feet bare. The more I gazed, the prettier she looked to me, so I kissed her again. "Naughty," she said with a merry laugh. "Look at the master taking his fill as if from his own. Have you no other business?" "There, there," I said, "don't take it amiss. Besides, I won't fall for your eyes, though they are pretty. Here comes the cousin, and the first thing he says is I've got a squint in my eyes. That's a nice thing to say. Oh, you see." "Course I see. The gentleman's lived in a city and thinks ladies' eyes are prettier than mine. Poor me," she said, laughing, with her arms akimbo, Eve's garrulous daughter, her teeth shiny as pearls. "Finizza, would you know," I said, with a strained laugh, "about my love?" "Love," she said with flurry. "Love, you say?" And arched her eyebrows with curiosity. "What love? Tell me, please, please, cousin," she added with pursed lips, and lowered her eyes so winsomely that they could hardly be seen under her eyelashes. "Sit here on the bed," I said, took her in my arms, and seated her as if she were a naughty child. I sat beside her, reached my arm around her neck, and gave her the story of my love misfortune. She sat listening with childish earnestness and attention, and when she lifted her eyes to look at me, they were stained with tears. "My poor cousin!" she exclaimed, and her kiss was ever so gentle and fresh. The pots on the stove started boiling. "My," she said, remembering, "I must take the victuals to your father. Be seeing you again this evening or tomorrow morning," she added. Then she flavored the food, chose a couple of full pots, smiled at me with all her face, walked out of the door, and started across the village. By and by father came home, having heard from her of my return. He hugged me to his heart. His head was white, the wrinkles on his brow and furrows on his face deeper. So much change I noticed in him, though. It was enough to bring tears to my eyes. I languished home for a long time in a dull, lackadaisical dejection. I had found a book on a rafter with moth-eaten leather binding, and red margins with tales handwritten in antiquated script, and initials illumined in red ink, doubtless an heirloom from the aged priest who had died long before. For days on end I would lie in the shade of the porch, book in hand, puzzling mechanically over the old text or just staring up at the smoked eaves, until I felt my head lifted up and sheltered into someone's lap. I would raise my eyes as far backward as I could see Finizza, who, having secured my head in her lap, started telling me riddles of fairy tales, singing away in a low voice some real or extemporized tune on lyrics invented by herself. Long evenings would I lie like that with my head in her lap, while the cattle were passing by us, coming back from the hills with udders full of milk, the bells around their necks enriching the dust-sweet air with their drowsy and melancholy tinkle. The revolution had flared up all over the plans of Transylvania, yet little did I care. I had been reduced to idle indifference, idleness of thought, idleness of feeling, to the most complete and idiotic sluggishness, by my love for one. Her very name, Poesis, could no longer rouse any feeling in my breast. She was long dead, and I had forgotten her, with hardly a spark of recollection, for it did not dawn on me that my heart had been killed and my intelligence slain, though I was languishing precisely in that vacant mood. Autumn had set in, and the forests of the shoulders of the mountains turned rusty. The first snowflakes spread their silvery coat down over the misty, cold air up the hill. There was the news abroad that the Romanians had risen in arms against the Hungarians, and the king of the forest and the barren, hoary hills had called up the eagles from their rocky eyries to rally round the Romanian colors. The tricolor was flying in the rocky heart of the hills, and in their cold air heralding Transylvania's liberation. One night I watched a magnificent scene. Big fires were flaring up higher and higher on the mountain tops, on their rocky brows. It looked as if the hills themselves had caught fire. Bands of men were seated around the fires, the lances propped on their shoulders sparkled in the air, sides turned into lances that were to spread terror among the enemies. From up there on the peaks the Romanians let go flaming straw-wreathed cartwheels, which turned demoniacal somersaults and fell roaring into the deep precipices, heading for the core of the earth. The Alpenhorns bugled on the peaks so heartily that the brass souls of the hills seemed to have woken to trumpet the last judgment. Every peak was afire, with so many huge red eyes, one on every mountain's brow. The ancient forests stirred to life from their winter hibernation. The stars and the moon looked paler against the sky. The sky itself was grislier, It was one of those grandiose sights that only God himself can paint on the world's vast canvas for our amazed eyes and overwhelmed hearts. The revolution had reached our mountains. As our village lay at the foothills, the Honveds would scout it at regular intervals in search of young men, but they had thoughtfully joined Yanku long before. The more elderly would have had me for their tribune, but owing to my mood I stayed insensitive and unresponsive to their grand cause. Braving all perils, Yanku's tribunes often visited the village, while bands of rebels stayed the night with us and vanished before dawn, lest Honveds should get wind of their whereabouts and fall on them by surprise. One night I heard the noise of shooting in the neighborhood. Worried, I flung the bedclothes aside, ran out, climbed the fence, and held myself onto the poles so as to gain a commanding view over the cluster of houses in the neighborhood. A house had been surrounded by the Honveds, who were now pounding on the door with the butts of their rifles to ram it in. In that instant, a volley of shots flashed through the window, and I heard the groans of the attackers. The door was broken in no time, letting out a bare-headed youth, with his sword in his teeth and the guns in his hands, leveled at the men on the doorstep, at whom he fired. On his tail, a handful of men set to thrusting their lances right and left, and making headway ran for their lives toward a cluster of rocks where they took cover, so the shots fired at the men now ransacking the house. I thought I had recognized a pale, bare-headed youth. Though I had only glimpsed him in the light of the rifle shots, I felt he could be no other than Yon. I returned home and went to bed again, but a whirl of thoughts would not allow me to catch a wink of sleep. If it had been Yon, the thought kept nagging me. For if it was he, I was left no choice. I had to follow him. Tossing about in my bed, I felt a horde of demons taking command over my fretful soul. Like as many embodied dreams, dreams with iron talons. I would turn my face to the wall, but the wall seemed smeared with red faces like those on the wooden icons in old churches, or turn over toward the oven, but the bluish coals in the grate were demons' red eyes, dancing a savage jig, and green smoke curling up looked like the weaving of unplaited grisly hair of a bloodthirsty fury. I would close my eyes tightly to chase the dreams away, but if sleep it was that I acquired, it only gave me headaches and heart-throbs. I felt a wooden talon wring out my brains, a heavy rock lying on my breast. Someone inside me stifled my breath, clasped me in his grisly long arms, and dropped me into a gloomy chasm wherein I fell. The ragged top of a rock loomed in sight halfway between heaven and hell, and I was bound to crash against it. I screamed out my lungs in fright and tried to wriggle out of the course my body had taken downward. But at that moment I reached the rock and felt an excruciating pain. My insides had been broken. I woke up. I had really fallen, but only out of bed. The fire was still glowing, and the tiny lamp flickered before the Mother of all Sorrows, lighting up her saintly visage. I made the sign of the cross and regained my feet. Going back to sleep, or even lingering there, were out of the question. I decided to let my first intention get the better of me and go out into the wide world wherever fate might lead me. I fed some brushwood into the fire, and it started crackling gaily and scattering fiery sparks. I drew a low stool near the fire, pricked Father's scythe from the corner of the hut, sat on the stool in the light of the brushwood fire, unsheathed a knife, and set with a will to fashioning a lance out of the scythe. I tapered the handle to fit into the blade hole, then sharpened the blade, especially its top, on a whetstone, making it razor-sharp so that had I touched a hair against it, the hair would have been cut in two. Fortunately, Father was so sound asleep that he did not hear me sharpening the scythe or fumbling under the bed for a brace of rusty long-barreled pistols, which I loaded with gunpowder from an ox horn and slipped under my belt. I covered my shoulders with an odd coarse woolen coat, my head with a sheepskin hat, balanced the lance over one shoulder, and let myself out. It was cold outside, but a gorgeous moon was floating over the blue, airy plains. In the house next door, where the skirmish had been fought, the door was wide open, and a big fire was burning on the dirt floor, started by the soldiers, who were now sprawled over the hay, puffing at their pipes, with their rifles within reach. A capacious pot was boiling on the stove, and the soldiers killed their time by spitting into the fire, sometimes missing. Their faces were savage and beastly. The saddled horses were tethered to the fence poles. I singled out a gray horse, standing aside without a bit in her muzzle, munching away at a truss of hay. I walked round the house to the back, and reached the gray horse, skirting the open door. I produced my knife from the belt, made fast work of cutting the straps that tied her to the fence, gathered her mane in a firm grip, bounced on her, stabbed my heels into her ribs. Mad with fury, she kicked the air with her hoofs, neighed, then broke into a fast gallop and darted off into the night, with never a look back, as if mounted on a spirit of wrath. I heard the report of a rifle behind me. A bullet whizzed past my ear, but I let go of the rein and kicked the horse in the ribs, and she kept up her gallop, tearing through the night's cold air with her hot body streaming beads of sweat. The moonbeams flashed on the lance on my shoulder, were cast back to pierce the darkness, and the flint stones sparkled and cracked under the horse's iron shoes, their shrieks rousing the slumberous echo of the hills. Thus the horse ran on the ride, whether like a flight in midair between heaven and earth, taken on and on by bodiless genius, or carried off by a dragon of yore, or by an evil spirit roaring through the air. How long our flight went on, I do not recall, but this I do remember, that suddenly my horse floundered and gasped for breath, slowed down to a clumsy canter, and foamed at the muzzle and nostrils, unaware I had left the highlands and was now in a plain. So far I had been no saner a sleepwalker. Everything I had done was done unconsciously, in the grip of some unexplainable desire or on a dark, senseless impulse. I stopped where I was, rubbed my eyes, and started taking in the lay of the land. The mountains were behind me. The Marais flowed straight ahead in the far distance, and to one side I noticed a townlet which set fire to all four corners, was beginning to burn. It was about an hour's ride away. The horse was exhausted and could hardly raise her hoofs clear of the ground. I urged her toward the town. Before long the limpid breath of the night became chillier and brisker. Though the sky was clear, tiny flecks of snow began to prick my face and brow, so I spurred the horse again, which switched into an easy trot as the wind began to blow through all the seams of my old clothes. The fire was spreading wider over the town, and when I approached it my ears could discern distant faint moans. The horse broke into a canter, the wind started to howl and whistle, and spurred by it, the flames took wings and soared sky-high. As I drew nearer, I noticed the savage cold wind storming the sea of fire and spreading it to all quarters, while drowning in it the thousands and thousands of swift, snowy souls. A concert of moans and groans was appalling to ear, and the cobblestones themselves would have splintered with compassion hearkening to such sounds. The town bed, beridden with fire and wind, had become one with the sky, for I could not tell the sky from the earth. The blaze soared slantwise, carried by the wind. The air and the smoke alike were afire. The sky was aglow, and its blue dome menaced to burn out and cave in. Trembling gold-eyed stars were entangled in the red clouds of smoke. Earth, air, and sky above all fell prey to one ruthless fire. My horse, without rein or spur, continued her advance by leaps and stars. Outside the town I dismounted, hid the later in the gutter on the high road, adorned my hat with a red feather, mounted back up, and entered the streets ablaze at both ends. In the savage hubbub of the enemy's drums, the horses crumbling down with the fire, the dark red flames, and the black smoke rushing out by the broken window panes, the rows of houses looked as if arrayed for battle, with their tops burning and their eyes filled with flames and smoke. People scurried about and shouted. The black streets were bustling like as many ant-hills. Some were carrying trunks with scared faces and eyes glaring at the soldiers, who were of two minds as to the object of a proper chase, the loot being spirited away, or the half-naked women running in the streets disheveled and pale as ghosts. Their husbands, run over by the cartwheels or brained against the burning walls, were lying on the cobblestones, some dead, some half dead, and some still managed to give a faint moan. The children were crying their eyes out, their lips whimpering their mothers' names, a cocked pistol in either hand. I spurred the horse, and she trotted along the streets over the corpses, over carts broken into pieces, over shattered boxes, spilling clothes and tools onto the road, over broken furniture, over slain animals. I rode with gritted teeth through that savage scene, through that terrible heart-rending drama highlighted by the all-consuming fire. On either side the rows of burning houses, the small white cobbles of the pavement strewn with corpses splashed with black blood, all the townspeople moaning, murder and might down on the earth, clouds and smoke up in the sky. Such was the long and short of that blood-curdling scene. A priest of my acquaintance lived in the town, and I felt I had to look for him. I gave a sigh of relief when, out in the unlit greenery of the outskirts, I saw no house burning. Large gardens, hedged with a thick tangle of thickets, lined the streets, and behind the thickets, left leafless in the autumn, stood the homestead surrounded by clusters of trees. I stopped by the front gate of the priest's courtyard. The gate wings were wide open. The windows were also open, and through them I could hear a woman's faint moans. Entering the house without precautions would have meant taking great chances, so I sneaked nearer to the window to cast a glimpse inside. But what a scene, my goodness! The room was teeming with soldiers, outdoing each other in savagery and drunkenness, who crouched laughing and yelling beside a broached sizable cask. There was a nook in the wall on the right of my window, with a wooden icon of the Mother of the Lord and a small lamp filled half with oil, half with water, burning in front of it. There were sheaves of dried self-heal and yellow flowers in the nook, and above it, hung on hooks. Under the nook was the desk with the priest's old leather-bound religious books, now in disarray, and some scattered on the floor. The icon nook was in a wall between this room and a smaller one. The priest was dangling on a strong iron hook above the door. His eyes eerily showed only their whites. The bluish foam of death trickled from the corners of his mouth down into his beard. His hands were tied in front. His daughter was leaning against a wall, pale as wax, her large black eyes sunken and lined with large bluish rings, unfocused like the eyes of a lunatic, her thin bluish lips, her unplaited jet black hair streaming down her neck, which had turned white like an insensitive block of marble, her long black silk gown. Everything about her gave her the look of a fury of sorrow, of a fury carved in marble. Her dried-up eyes glared in demoniacal and lunatic desperation at the men, flushed with drink, who sprawled on the floor, were ogling her with lecherous, glittery eyes and savage, subhuman desire. "Haw, haw!" yelled a narrow-browed one, with flushed fat cheeks, small green eyes, and a fiery red hair. "Haw, my beauty! What's that look on your face? We've hanged your old man." The G.D. priest, so what? Might as well laugh at the old fool. "What's that to you? You're going to live with us. You'll be my woman, my chick. He, he laughed on his tottering legs. "How'd you like me, girlie? Handsome, ain't I? Such a handsome lad, my own ma's fine lad. Red-faced to boot, and more. He. And the white-skinned girlie's fallen for the red-faced lad, or hasn't she?" With that he drew nearer to the girl, who was trembling like a leaf. With her lips opened in fright, he was going to lay his hands on her, but she dropped onto her knees. Disconsolate and beautiful, she lifted her large eyes that would have moved a heart of stone. "I entreat you," she said, "kill me. Kill me as you have killed my father, and I will be grateful." He, what a thing to say. How come, indeed? Do you hear, Istvan? She would rather die. No, he added with a stupid grin. You're not to die. She's not to die, echoed the others in the room, all jeering. She's our woman. She's not to die. The lot fell on me, said the cannibal, so leave me alone with her. The others struggled to their feet and tottered out of the door. With terrible determination, the wretched girl lowered her head and hit its crown against the wall, but she only fainted and recoiled into the arms of the cannibal, and his unbuttoned shirt, leaving bare the red, furry hair on his chest, grabbed her in his filthy arms, fumbled with his sparsely mustachioed, filthy mouth for her lips, now bluish like two sloes. She divined his intention, mustered her strength, and wriggled out of his arms. I had leveled the pistol the moment she opened her eyes. She was rushing for the door, but on noticing the weapon, she stopped short, a marble statue of sublime distress, the pride of a lioness writ all over her face and a savage virginal spark in her eyes. With a firm hand, I fired straight at her bosom. I had taken a good aim, for she smiled like the angelic smile of a martyr, and subsided onto the floor. At the crack of my weapon, the Hungarian dropped the earthen candlestick with all its tall tallow candle. Presently all his mates rushed in, relit the candle, and staggered with eyes bulging out with shock, nearer to the body of the dead girl, now lying rigid on the floor with her hands joined on her bosom. I could ill afford to linger by that window, so I walked around the house and jumped over a window hedge into the room adjoining the one wherein the tragedy had befallen, separated by a door, fortunately a locked one, from the scene that barbarous cruelty. It did not take me long to find the nook with the icon of the Mother of the Lord. There was a window which opened to my side, and I swiftly removed the icon propped against the pane and snuffed out the lamp. As in every country house, there was a small glass partition through which I could see all that was going on in the other room. I was not afraid, for I have never laid much stock on life. Besides, I was determined to sell my life dearly if it came to fighting for it. "Haw, said the repulsive red-haired man. "Your dad is a doornail." "Darn you and your piety," and he kicked her. She was dead indeed. The hem of her black gown was spread on the floor, the large eyes were closed, and for all her sorrows, a bitter yet sublime smile had lighted up her bloodless dead face, white as a shroud. Her hands joined on the heart I had stopped beating with my bullet, concealed the wound, yet a trickle of blood dripped onto her black gown. She was beautiful lying like that, a saintly white virgin martyr, lying on the floor, amid those satanic brutish figures. One of the party pushed the priest's leg, swinging him to and fro. Another raised a candle to his white beard, which caught fire, and the flame rose to his cheeks. The bluish skin on the old man's face started to split. His whitish, long eyelids were aflame. The burning skin made the eyeballs rise up, and the still shiny whites of his eyes savagely peered at those dull-witted men. It was a terrible, blood-curdling sight indeed. The burnt beard, the singed, blackish face, the sunken eyeballs turned inside out, the gaping mouth with froth sizzling in the heat of the fire, in fine the mutilated head of a corpse with eyes eloquent of the cruelty of their wrongdoing, glaring at the laughing brutes who did not get the meaning of the dead man's wordless grin. He, said Janos. While you're having fun with the priest, I'll have fun with his daughter. Do you think she's rid of me now that she's dead? No, girlie. Get up and give Janos a nice kiss. As good as his word, he grabbed her by the arm and dragged her out of the room through the dust on the floor that soiled and bleached her black gown. Though I was not sure I made sense of the cannibal's intentions, a horrendous idea struck me. Could those men be so sacrilegious as to rape the corpse of a virgin? Yet along with that apprehension, the idea of a dreadful revenge took possession in my mind. It hardly took me a minute to take off my shoes, to fetch several armfuls of dry straw from the backyard up into the loft, to strew it about the loft, and to light it. I climbed down the ladder in no time. Finding the key in the door of the entrance hall, I fixed the latch and turned the key in the lock without letting the drunks inside notice a thing. The open door was now the only escape. In superhuman fury, I fetched a whole haystack under the window, then heaved the big clear of its hinges, propped it against the window, and lighted the straw, which caught fire readily, being dried by the wind. At that moment the men inside seemed to sober up, and they started pounding on the door in mad fury. But the thick double door was reinforced with steadfast iron rivets. They stampeded to the window, but the gate propped there had caught fire, and I added another gate and a haystack on top of it. Presently the roof was ablaze. The beams started crackling, the wind joined forces, with the smoldering flames lending them redoubled strength, and the savage yells of the cannibals, buried in the flames, grew as loud as the groans of the sinners doomed to hellfire. Still barefoot, I bounced into the house, kicked her in the ribs, and retraced my course across town. The fire had relented, the streets were deserted. In some places the corpses had been stacked in disorderly heaps. I rode swiftly out of the town, retrieved my lance from the gutter by the high road, took off the red feather from my hat, blew it into the wind, and rode back toward the hills, though not toward my village. I came across a mountain trail and urged my steed along it. She took it at a slow pace, floundering and panting, her hoofs stumbling against the bigger boulders at the bends in the trail, winding up among the rocks. The farther I rode into the highlands, the fresher and colder the air grew. Under a clearer sky, and the moon showed her yellow visage through the cloud's silvery veil, my mind was as void of ideas as the meaningless motley of discordant colors, red, black, green, yellow, all smeared on the same spot of a canvas. In fine, a preposterous chaos, like the thoughts of an idiot, was whirling inside it. I could not make head or tail of the recent events, like a person who, having gone without sleep for days on end, and his brain a jumble with sleeplessness, walks among people and cannot tell reality from dreams unless his mind imagine deep traits, threatening grimaces, and ominous projects on the countenance of every acquaintance, who sees the shadows growing taller, and taking on human contours in the walls, or gazing at clear water, imagines his very gaze stirs up the mud therein. A mood wherein no concept perceived by the senses is apt to be passed on unmuddled to his inner consciousness. It seemed to me I had lived out a tale with dragons and bloodshed, wherein, in other places and on other shores, lovers would still roam about the shady verdure of the groves, their faces washed silvery by the light of a pale moon smiling through the clouds, faces beautified by the melancholy of love's tender dreams. That night was a meaningless, courtly romance of the Middle Ages, wherein there was no room for scenes smeared with blood, fire, and the bluish-red darkness of smoke. Though such a procession of hideous masks of corpses and satanic red and grimacing faces and seemingly passed before my eyes, they mixed in my troubled soul and resulted in such a torpor of thought and feeling that uppermost in my wearied mind was an overwhelming wish to sleep. Hardy natures will sleep soundly before a catastrophe, and I think they will sleep as soundly after it, for there is nothing so apt to render a man completely insensitive and dull-witted as such terrible scenes. Reaching the crest of a hill with an outcrop of rocks scattered about it like as many sleepy white sheep, the white moonlight caressing their silvery fleece, I dismounted and tethered the horse to the twisted and gnarled branches of a bush with frost-bitten yellow leaves. All by myself there, and prey to the deepest torpor, I pulled my fur hat over my eyes and ears, laid my head on a slab, and my body on a heap of dry leaves, and went to sleep. The dream, to me an untroubled world, suffused with adamantine clear rays, studded with stars pure as gold, fragrant, and the shady verdure of laurel groves. The dream unbarred its gates, and let me enter its poetical and forever youthful gardens. The hilltop whereupon I lay sleeping turned into one of Semirami's hanging gardens, its highest terrace joining the sky, and to a wondrous garden of Eden bathed in an eternally untroubled sunlight, with wide palm alleyways, walks strewn with white sand, fountains overflowing long adamantine rays, which gurgled and trickled along the grooves of a cluster of jagged rocks, crystal clear yet heavy with the sweet scent of amber, the sleep-inducing nectar of the east. And all that wonderland was above the clouds. The sky was clear and emerald green as firm dome reached down in both east and west into the undulating green mirrors of the seas. In one place only the sky looked scorched and burnt, with large gap where from blazing stones and rubble of broken walls falling onto the earth, the stones thus falling to the earth piece by piece built up a wild, lifeless city by the bank of the Muresh, a burnt-out city with gloomy, painless windows, easy prey to savage roar of the chilly winds. Presently the scene brightened, the gap in the sky grew deeper and wider. The blue dome embracing the earth drew aside, uncovering another dome beyond, if one far higher and wider, of a limpid, pure gold, like the yellow light of the sun, so that the whole of it looked like a huge sun embracing its own world, the world beyond the sky. Golden light soaked the air, everything about was golden light, enriched with the gentle innocent moon of silver harps played by a silver-clad flight of angels, floating on glittery wide white rings across that golden kingdom. Like ethereal genii, they were floating, or like transparent shadows, their skin bluish as soft marble, their eyes blue, their long black curls framing their marble-white faces and necks and streaming down their long soft whiteness. Among those blue-eyed angels I singled out one with large black eyes, likewise snowy, but thin of face, clad in glossy black attire, with hands joined on her breast. She was floating in the golden air, with her tear-stained large eyes directed upward. I knew her. I had seen that disheveled black hair. I had seen that deep, sublime sorrow, a boundless desperation, whose only guiding star is God himself, had engraved its deep traits over the visage before me, and I had seen it before. All the sky was clear and blithesome. One angel only was sad. It was Maria, the daughter of the aged priest, now beautified and transfigured, yet to me stood for the genius of the martyred Romanian nation, a tear-stained, pale genius, whose only hope is God, whose only support is heaven. The night's icy hoarfrost had deposited 2 silver-gray guns on my long black eyelids. Eventually my eyes felt the chill and opened. The moon had set long before, the sky was bleak, and far in the east a sleepy and dingy dawn appeared, which hardly splashed a little red color in the bluish-gray sky. I shook the cold off my body, lifted my hat over the eyes, and stirred the horse, who was sleeping on the ground with bent legs, to let them share in the warmth of the body, and I closed her obedient large eyes. She jumped onto her legs. I mounted into the saddle and resumed the ride across the mountains. As we advanced, the horse sped to trot, for the ride was a godsend to her too, allowing her to warm her blood. By and by the sun was up, and the higher it rose, the warmer its rays grew, and before long I felt their heat on my back. I dismounted. The lance on my shoulder sparkled in the sun, and walked barefoot beside the horse on the fire gravel of the mountain trails. I spied a Romanian outpost sentry perched on a rock and sunning himself, a pipe in his mouth, and the spike of his lance thrust into the ground. I went up to him. "Good day to you, my lad," I said, stroking the horse's smooth neck. "Is there with you someone by the name of so-and-so?" I gave him Yon's surname. "I should think so. You'll find him all right, for he's our tribune," answered the lad, as he sat shaking the ashes off his earthen pipe. "I wonder if you would take me to him," I added. "Me? Not likely. he replied, and took a tobacco from a pleated white pouch, which he stuffed into his pipe with his little finger. Not allowed to leave my post, have to stand watch here. But the trail yonder hill will take you right to the camp. On his last words he produced a thin from his belt pouch, made a hole in the tobacco, and lit it with a white-handed tinder-box. When he of his mouth and his eyes focused naively on the pipe-mouth, apparently in wonder at seeing it glow like a hot lump of coal, his frizzy sheepskin hat had lowered over his eyes. I took the trail uphill and saw there round big bonfires burning in broad daylight, the flames licking the crisp air with their forked yellow tongues, bands of peasants roasting rams and ewes on the spit, shouting, singing, or playing their flutes. To one side, some bouncing on the ground with their light sandals to the tune of an elder flute, played by a lad seated on a boulder. The merry shouts of smoke curling up from the ring of the fires, the pairs of eyes outdoing each other in size and inquisitiveness, all bore the stamp of the genuine Romanian peasant, his face sunburnt yet well drawn, with lively hazel eyes, glossy, long, curly hair falling freely about his smooth, wide brow, black moustaches, aquiline nose, and protruding chin like an effigy of the warriors of yore, the brown sheepskin coat hanging down from the shoulders, the unlaced white shirt, leaving bare the sunburnt chest throbbing from the beats of his free heart, the white homespun tight trousers, the sandals turned up at the tops and laced with black woolen cords around the legs, the green belt, the red pouch under it holding a sheath knife, a timber box, and a spare flint. In fine, the pointed fur hat, shading the piercing eyes, the same type of character over and over again in various guises all about those children of the mountains. I inquired after Yon, and a peasant pointed to a tall built at some distance from the others, and told me that was the tribune's place, and that he was ailing. I walked to that fire where, upon a rotten hollow tree trunk, was firmly bent on showing that there is smoke, there is a fire. Yon was lying on a makeshift bed of dry leaves, his bare feet stretched toward the fire, and his sheepskin coat pulled over his head, to expose no part of his face to the cold. The spike in his lance was thrust into the ground. I tethered my horse to the lance, knelt down by his bedside, and raised his coat clear of his face. His large eyes were closed, and a network of fine blue veins showed through the white, thin eyelids. The former large, deep rings round his eyes had turned their bluish hue into copper. Only his face was as pale as ever. I sat at his head, and took an eyeful of him. Eventually I shook him by the arm and made him open his eyes. He looked up at me with sleepy eyes, and in the melancholy idleness that sleep is wont to spread over a visage, he reached his arm round my neck and said with a drowsy smile, "You, here?" His untroubled smile bespoke a man without a passion in the world. His countenance was saintly, as it were. It was obvious that all things mundane had been stifled in his heart. "So I am," I blurted out, and took his hand in a firm grip. "So I am. I thought you'd stopped caring for your people. So insensitive your love for an unworthy woman had made you," he said, wrapping his feet in 2 white woolen cloths, and putting on his russet calfskin sandals. "Not caring for my people," I rejoined with a bitter smile. "I might never have cared if it were not for that terrible night that taught me once and for all to care." And I gave him the long and the short of what I had seen with my bodily and inner eyes. With each word I uttered his large blue eyes turned worried, and flashed an unnatural demoniacal fire, and deep terrible traits furrowed his pale delicate visage. "The cannibals!" he whispered through clenched teeth. "Well, here I am," I concluded, "because there's nowhere else my steps would take me. What do I have at stake? Life? There's naught uglier, bleaker, more tedious than life. I've had enough of that preposterous dream anyway. The soul, perhaps? Could anyone think of his in times like these?" "Calm down, my friend," he soothed me. "True enough, it doesn't pay to live unless one has a goal in life, and on my soul, we'll set ourselves a great goal indeed." His shining eyes flared up in their sockets, and a show of pride spread over his countenance. It did not take me long to feel at home among the peasants. Before long I changed my city clothes for the long tight trousers, plaited around the shins, and light calfskin. Clad like that, I would often take turns at keeping night watch on some mountain top, bathed by the moonbeams like a Roman sentry of yore, who, while guarding the iron crest of the corruptions, would rivet his watchful gaze southward, thinking of his mother, the beloved snowy queen bathing her alluring body in the sky-blue warm seas. Her brow crowned with dreams, had abandoned her eagle-eyed princely son on the barren time-old crest of the Carpathians. Italy has forgotten the Romanians, yet the Romanians still remember Italy. We saw the winter out in the skirmishes and hardships. Bringing to life those hardships would be like unearthing the history of those Lancer legions. Even after the imperial army withdrew from Transylvania, continued to abide by their oath to the throne, relying only in their scant numbers, their brave hearts, and on the blades tied to the handles of their scythes. One night, while I was keeping watch in an outpost, together with a score of men, Jon included, a scout came and broached the news that 2 or 3 companies of Hunbeds had quartered with a Magyar count in his castle and were now having the time of their lives. The night was so freezing cold that we blew the frostbite off our fingers with our breath. Jon's eyes flared up. "Friends, make ready for battle," he ordered in a compelling voice. It was like bringing grist to their mill, for in a split second the lads stood erect from their sitting or lying positions and gripped the lances from the grass in their sinewy wet hands. In another moment we were downhill, then crossed the fields of soft grass, headed for the castle standing in the center of the well-tended large park. All its windows showed lights against the night's dense darkness, as if they were beacons luring us to draw nearer. Soon we reached the railing of the park. A bulldog started to bark, yet his throaty bark was lost in the night air, for it did not interrupt the clinking of the glasses and the drinking bout inside, and before long we heard him lying down on a straw bed, grumbling with disappointment and shaking his chain. Weary of his light sleep, we skirted the park and jumped over the fence at a convenient pace. It was a 2-storied castle with a balcony overlooking the garden on the upper floor, below which was a causeway of rough flagstones. In all the rooms downstairs the tables were laid. The men had propped their rifles against the walls and were enjoying themselves, drinking, laughing, and singing. I picked out the lads with rifles, deployed them by the windows, and at my sharp command they fired. The bullets whizzed through the large halls, and everybody jumped to their feet in fright. Some were shot in their mouths, distorted in the grin of death. Most of the party dropped their glasses, forgot about the weapons, and stampeded headlong for the door. "Death to them!" I shouted, hoisted a window clear of its hinges, and was the first to jump into the hall. The others followed suit. Everyone still in the hall was slain. We took possession of their loaded guns, rushed through the lighted large rooms of the castle, and then smashed everything to pieces. An alarm bell was tolling in this turret. Inside the castle the reports of rifles and the drunken beastly yells of the dying mixed with the happy shouts of our lads. I and Jon climbed the grand stairs to the upper floor. I forced the big door open with my shoulder and entered a large drawing room, with a door opening onto the balcony. Actually, a French window, its panes letting in the white light of the moon, now clear of the clouds. The moonlight shone on a wall hung with weapons. All at once 2 frightened eyes sparkled in the dark. A tall man in corner seemed ready to attack us. I held out my arm and pulled the trigger, and in a faint light I caught a glimpse of a bluish face I had seen before. "It is he!" I cried out in a rage. It was Proise's lover. Instantly Jon caught hold of his lapels, yet, disregarding the grip, the Count opened the door to the balcony with one hand and made an effort with the other to throw Jon over the rail onto the flagstones. In a split second my sword cut off the arms gripping Jon's chest, and Jon fell down with the severed arm. The Count raised his other arm, pistol in hand, which he leveled at my brow. Jon, back on his feet, stabbed his dagger into the Count's elbow, throwing his arm off balance as he shot went astray and whizzed through my hair. Yet he managed to put his arm around Jon's throat. The Magyar had intended to bite the crown of Jon's head, and his teeth might have broken his skull bones, had not Jon raised his shiny dagger and thrust it at the Count's nape deep into his brain. A horrible yell ensued, and the battle was over. The door opened, and our lads entered with torches in their hands. Jon had fallen over the Magyar, and I drew nearer them with a torch. The corpse was a terrifying sight, his mouth half open, his teeth bared for biting. The frightened and distorted bluish face betraying the madness of his shattered brain. His teeth had apparently ground the poisonous bluish foam trickling at the corners of his mouth. I stood staring in unutterable hatred at the man who had robbed me of all I had, who was now only a wretched corpse. The lads made mercy, took the weapons down from the wall, and shared them around. We climbed down the grand staircase, entered the room with laid tables, opened all the windows and disposed of the corpses, and sat around the table as if nothing had happened, and we were wedding guests. Some might consider such things unbelievable, yet, should they know how revolution and uncertainty as to one's life are apt to render one insensitive and to turn bloodshed into man's natural way of life, they would get an inkling not only into our behavior but also into the centuries wherein the people's main occupation was fighting and looting. That was one of the many events of the year, yet I shall recount another, one that cost me dearly. There was a Saxon who owned a mill moored on the Merege, from whom we used to buy our supplies of flour, which made the Saxon hold his tongue in front of Magyar detachments scouring the country. The mill rocked quietly on the Mrej, bathing its skeleton of rotten timber in the white foamy water of the river. Its deafening wheels turned like two black dragons, and the ruddy, fat, and moon-faced Saxon strutted with his hands in the pockets of his white apron amid the crowd who came here with sacks of grain for grinding and with treasures of stories, tales, and news, making the loft look like a fair rather than an ordinary attic. Often, without disclosing my name or trade, I would sit on a sack of flour with the rim of my hat over my eyes, puffing at my pipe and listening to a giggle of girls, the tales of the elderly, the oaths of the men, or to the drowsy yet sweet squeak of an old fiddle on which an aged gypsy would play sometimes merry and sometimes sad tunes. The expressive swarthy face, the snow-white beard, the almost blind eyes dimmed with old age, the hairy bare chest, only half covered by a black shirt, the battered brown sheepskin hat, letting out the white hair through its gaps, made a sight of the old man who would sit on a heap of diffused millstones, stuck in a corner of the mill, and tell his tales not by word of mouth, but by the tunes of his strings. It was a warm day, and our party, who were to make a sortie down the valley, had decided to spend the night in the Saxon's mill so as to be on our way at the break of day. The queue had thinned out, the sun was setting behind the hills for his due sleep. The old gypsy had laid his head on the millstone and gone to sleep, with the pipe still burning in his mouth. Like a king in his soft, golden tasseled bed, the men had loaded their sacks on their carts, and yoked their white, fat, long-horned oxen were now setting out on their sundry ways, with a spade of whip lashing and shouting toward the highlands of the plains. Dusk had closed in. The millstones had been stopped. Only the huge mill continued its lazy rocking on the Mrej, pulling at the long linen fetters that tethered it to the banks. The Saxon sat on the flat slab of the wide door of the mill, lit his pipe, and watched in melancholy the rise of the evening star. I sat beside him in the dusk that was growing darker, and suddenly I heard the woeful moan of an alpenhorn. "My men," I said, jumped to my feet, and hurried off toward the plain. But when I was about 40 feet away, I looked back, and in the dim twilight I thought I spied Honved, sitting beside the Saxon and casting impatient glances about him. The import of that scene did not dawn on me. I met my lads on the plain, and Jon was with them. How handsome he was that night! The scene was so well imprinted on my mind as if it had happened a minute ago. His coarse woolen coat was unbuttoned, leaving free his throat and front, so his white chest showed through his linen shirt. His face was pale yet sweet and full of kindness, the gaze of his blue eyes melancholy. His long hair fell freely on his shoulders from under a wide-brimmed black hat. In truth, he was as handsome as a woman, in a fair-haired, pale, appealing way. "You look like a girl," I exclaimed, and hugged him to my heart. "And you, like a boy," he retorted with a reckless laugh. Yet hit cold, firm handshake evinced his delicate, long, and white fingers, through which ran a lion's strength. We reached the mill and greeted the Saxon who opened the door. It was the gypsy who sat beside him, telling him how back in his youth he used to outwit his neighbors, stealing their chickens, hanging them by the legs on the hooks under his coat, and then walked whistling about the village with the coat dangling on one shoulder, as it did not cross their minds what he had hidden there. The Saxon roared with laughter, though his laughter sounded strange to me. Yet I might have had it wrong, for, as you know, deceived by the distance, I had suspected it was a Honved he was talking to. As all men were tired, we lay down right and left about the mill. The miller pottered for a while about his sacks and tubs, pulled out the fire in the stone hearth, and lay down downstairs where the millstones were. Everyone set to driving his pigs to market, outdoing each other and snoring and moaning on the sack where he was lying. I had spread my coat on the floor and went to sleep there beside Jon, who had reached his arm about my neck before falling asleep. Yet I overheard the Saxon getting up and pacing the floorboards downstairs. He climbed the stairs cautiously on tiptoe with a rushlight in his hand. He had hardly reached the top of the steps when I fancied I saw the bluish barrel of a rifle shining at the window, taking aim at the sleeping men. I kept silent and closed my eyes so that through the slits under my eyelids I could watch the Saxon drawing nearer and leaning over us to see whether he was sleeping. There was a frightening look on his face, but just when he had retreated to the door, also on tiptoe, I intended to put up the strong wooden bolt. I jumped to my feet. "Get up, friends," I shouted at the top of my voice. "We're done for." In a split second, all the men, though sleepy and scared, were on their feet. The Saxon, taken unawares, dropped his rushlight. He would have been killed that instant if the extinguishing of the only light had not plunged the room into darkness. A rifle shot blasted through the window, but no moan was heard, which meant that no one had been hit. The hubbub outside redoubled. "In battle's line," Jon's silvery voice called out loudly, and in the moonbeams sifting in through the slits in the wooden shutter, I saw the lancers arrayed in the front line, and in the second line shone the short-barreled mountain rifles leveled on the shoulders of the frontliners. It had taken no longer than a minute. At that moment, the big door cracked on its hinges and fell in. "Fire!" Yon ordered, and the enemies rushed in by the doorway, started to groan, some with death, others only wounded, accompanied by the incessant cracks and barks of our rifles. "Forward!" ordered Yon, and the lancers swooped down with fury on their numerous enemies. I had caught hold of a battle-axe, and using its spike and edges, played havoc with everyone within range. They fired a volley, and our ranks thinned. "Forward!" called Yon in a mad rage. With one more savage attack, we broke through their ranks and rushed out into the moonlight. Hardly had we left the room when some pistol took aim at Yon's naked chest. It cracked with a fiery snake rushed out of its muzzle, but in that same instant I crushed my axe into the head of the soldier and split it in two as if it were firewood. "My God, I'm dying," said Yon in a low voice. I took him in the crook of my arms and set to running like a phantom swiftly and mad with rage, leading my men who stampeded after me, followed by shots and mounted men. Straight ahead we ran for the shelter of the mountains. The poor boy's chest was bleeding fearfully. The moon in the sky had caught fire and was scorching the crown of my head. The men looked like mad phantoms flying and whizzing past me. Before long we came across a trail leading up to the hills. The run was more difficult, the climb more strenuous, yet we managed to reach a hilltop with a rich outcrop of scattered boulders. "Halt!" called one of the oldest of the mountain folk. "Friends, array these boulders in line." No sooner said than the boulders were arranged in two lines, in battle array like a fortified wall. As soon as the enemy started coming uphill, the first line of boulders was sent rolling, and after much cracking, splitting and crashing against the rocky ridges jutting out through the grass and the thickets, they eventually broke the lines of men downhill or tumbled from the rocks with their full weight straight onto the heads of the more daring. The rifles had been behind the second line of boulders, and they fired at every enemy in sight. "Toma," said the man who had taken over the command, fidgeting with old sword at his hip. "Toma, run away with Yon. Run straight ahead as far as from here as your legs will take you. We'll follow suit later, but run we must, for it looks to me like there's many soldiers downhill, and we are short of large boulders and bullets. We'll also have to run for our lives." I took off my woolen coat and wrapped it around Yon's seemingly dead body. I ran uphill through the shrubberies, on craggy slopes, plodded across the gravel left by the autumn torrents, folded bridgeless brooks, and at long last, high on summit, in the middle of a coppice of thorn bushes, I spied a fire wherein a few embers were still glowing amid the grey ashes. I laid Yon by the fire, which I kindled with all the brushwood and dry leaves near at hand, and I started a big fire with tall flames and much smoke. I gathered several armfuls of dry leaves, contrived a bed for Yon, and bared his chest to examine the wound. It was only a dark red tiny hole below the ribs, and no blood dripped from it, which was the very cause of his lethargy. I put my mouth to the wound and sucked forcefully a mouthful of blood. Clogged black blood gushed out of the wound. His pulse started to beat ever so faintly, and he opened his filmy eyes. His face had turned haggard, as if it were mere skin and bones, and there was a network of thin red veins over the whites of his eyeballs. "Yon," I said, "how are you feeling, my friend?" "Felling?" he said with a bitter smile. "How should I feel? I'm dying. That's all. Aren't you going to put up with my friend? Why? Oh, if you only knew how happy I'll be when I'm dead. I'll be reunited with Sophia." "You're raving, Yon," I said soothingly. "That's childish. Raving, you say? I feel death running along my veins. So cool and sweet. And he says I'm raving. Believe me, I'm happy. As happy as can be." His alabaster white face chiseled with pain, with serene and sweet. A new fainting fit was coming. His head sank back into the dry leaves. His pulse stopped, and once again he appeared to have expired. I stared at his face, confused and helpless. He showed no signs of life, and there was nothing I could do about it. The deathly silence was broken only by the distant shots of our fighters, and each crack made me start. That cowardly had the misfortune turned me. I knelt by him and took his head in the palm of my hand, but when I lifted it, his head hung limp. I kept looking at him, and words failing me, I only kissed his alabaster-like face with my mouth gory with the blood of his heart. His face stayed unmoving and unresponsive, its whiteness in eerie contrast with the smears of my bloody kisses. A shrill whistle on a leaf roused me from my stupor. The shooting had ceased, and I heard the sound of footsteps coming nearer. It must have been my lads, who, no longer able to continue the fight, were now retreating. Before long I saw the old tribune sweating and panting, and the shooting resumed, this time nearer us. "How is he?" he asked in a tired voice, and cast a frightened glance at Yon. He's dying, I replied curtly and apathetically. They're after us. My lads will put up a fight for as long as they can, yet in the long run they'll have to run for it. He knelt by Yon, who, because of the proximity of the fire with its tall flames that gave a rosy hue to his pallor, had begun to show signs of life. What are we to do? We can't take him with us, and we can't leave him here either. Chieftain, they'll be there in a moment, cried a lad scurrying toward us from the battlefield. Our lads can't hold out any longer. We gained our feet in shock. One moment, said the old man, motioning me aside and looking at Yon, whose large dying eyes had a vacant gaze like the eyes of a lunatic. Step aside, Thomas, said the old man. There's something I must say to brother Yon. He had unsheathed his sword and stood glaring at it through the large tears welling in his old eyes. Brother Yon, urged in a quiet, hardly audible voice, cross yourself. Slowly, painstakingly, Yon made the sign of the cross. The sword swished through the air, and Yon's head rolled upon the dry leaves. You lunatic, I shouted, and leveled my pistol at the old man's brow. You've done wrong. Wrong, said the old man, falling into my arms as he burst out crying in my chest. Wrong? What else was I to do? The fit of trembling, the convulsive moans, the tears emerging strenuously out of his breast like a demoniacal power, bespoke the intensity of his grief. The hubbub of the retreating men was nearer, and we expected the shots to whiz past our ears. Come on, cried the lad standing by us. Come on, wake up. Let's run for it. He had covered Yon's body with leaves and stones and thrown his head into a well nearby. Like frightened, panting buck deer, the lads were coming from all sides. Run for it, all were crying, and took us by force in their disorderly retreat. Dazed and troubled, I ran wherever my legs would take me until the pursuers lost our trail, and we thought it was safe enough to stop to regain our breath. On a mountain top, we struck our flints, started several campfires, and sat round them. All the men were dog-tired, yet one of us who had to stand sentry. Some were nursing their wounds, most of them only skin deep. Others lay on the ground. I volunteered for the night watch, and they consented only too gladly. The old man sat wrapped in thought, and staring at the fire's innards, which would burst and scatter sparks. The lads went to sleep with their hearts in their mouths, and the old man set to whittling a piece of wood. I alone stood up, reached for my lance, and went off to take the air among the rocky skeletons. The night was cold and dark. My painfully rambling thoughts gave a splitting headache, and I felt my skull was about to burst under the pressure of my rebellious and sinister brains. One more thought would have been the last straw. Thus I watched all that night in a burning fever, and if I do not recall it now, it is because there is naught to recall except that, dazed and insensitive, I had succumbed again to the torpor that had always went hand in hand with my griefs. On the morrow, when the golden sun shone high in the sky, and the lads who long up and about were keeping watch over the plain, like as many eagles in their eyries, assured me our enemies had ceased their chase, I put a spade on my shoulder and walked downhill to where Yon had died. The enemies had searched the place, but failed to find the body under the heap of leaves and stones. I set to digging his grave in the blistering heat of the day. My brow and chest were afire, yet no bead of sweat trickled down my body. I kept digging in a rage, as if I had a treasure to hide. When the grave was sufficiently deep, I uncovered the beheaded body from under the stones and leaves, and laid it slowly and carefully, as if his sense were still alive, into his cool eternal abode. Then I went to the well wherein his head had been thrown. The sun mirrored his face in the shiny crystal-clear water, shimmering like an undulating silver mirror, wherein at the bottom of the well lay like the youth's finely shaped head. The running water had cleansed and removed the smears of blood, and the pale blonde head showed up its silver-white face with lips bluish, the closed large eyes, and the silky hair flowing freely down the current. A smile seemed to brighten his thin, pale face. I took a handful of water and washed my feverish face. Then more water, and washed my feverish face. Then more water, which I let flow down my burning chest. The water turned muddy and red with blood, but I bent over its surface and swallowed large mouthfuls of the water mixed with his blood, then dipped both hands into the well, took out Yon's head, and lifted it in the sunlight for a long and painful last look. I laid it into the grave above the body, covered it with my coarse woolen coat, fearing unreasonably lest the mud might harm him, and filled the grave with earth. Every now and then I had a mind to lie at his side and wait for a rock to tumble on me over the brim of the grave, or to shoot myself, and thus to put an end to the misery we call life. A peasant was standing sentry on a distant rock, his firelock shining in the sunlight, and his gaze scanning the clouds. An eagle gripping a white dove in its brass talons flew over my head with much croaking and flapping of wings, and scared by my own presence, he circled up towards the clouds. The peasant took aim at the black speck sailing at the air and fired, and the eagle whirled down into the precipice with the dove in its talons. "Revenge!" I gasped out. "Why should I die before avenging him? After that there will be time enough to die or even to live, if I so choose." I filled the grave with earth, tore a green branch from a tree and laid it across the grave, and whistling through my teeth with an assumed yet sinister carelessness, I retraced my way uphill. When I arrived at our Roman-style camp, I saw the old man sitting by the fire, sad and wistful, with his legs stretched out and his brow propped up in his hand. I drew nearer and sat by him. "What shall we do?" I inquired in a low, hoarse voice. "I've been scheming, and now I'm mighty glad to tell you how I'd take the devil and his to outfox my plans. I chose to cut his life short rather than to leave them in their hands, easy prey to torture and abuse. Don't you know, Toma, that torture will stir up a man's soul, and cruelest pains only spark up the life of the dying? What a life! And do you think I'd forgiven them all that? Or that I'd forgiven the Saxon who sold us as Judas sold our Lord Jesus? I've sent Floria's boy Nitza out for scouting, for he knows the gypsy tongue. He smeared his face with soot and put on rags and went sneaking about the mill to see whether they're still thereabouts. If they're gone, we'll call on my good friend the Saxon and drink a jug of wine to his health as soon as it gets dark." I'll continue in a few seconds. Just. A hubbub of voices came from the lads. They were laughing while carrying Nitza, shoulder high, who barefoot, with his hat tilted over one ear, the hair jutting out through the holes, his elbows were jutting out through his coat sleeves, and his knees through his tight trousers, black-faced and thin like a devil, the eyes 2 pinpoints at his head, was boasting in a throaty mock gypsy voice on how cleverly he had duped his beloved godfather, the Saxon. But when he was near, his eyes glinted warfare, only for us to see. It was the mocking, merry mask of a soul incensed with hatred and revenge, the countenance at variance with the heart, the alternate shy or stupid smile at a variance with his mood. The lads stepped back and left him with us to tell us all he had learnt. The old man advised the lads to snatch as much sleep as they could in the daytime, for we had some urgent business to attend to that night. Nita culled lettuce from a grass plot and squeezed their sap into large balls of corn mush he had stowed in his knapsack. The day had faded, the lads had gone to sleep, and I alone was roaming in silence, my head prey to an indescribable restlessness, my heart brimful with a terrible dejection never experienced before. What was there left for me to this side of the earth? He had been my last link to life, and now, too, he was gone. I do not think the loss of a brother, if I had chanced to have one, would have aggrieved me more bitterly. Pleated, fidgety, grey clouds had filled the sky. They flew to and fro in the night's warm air, and the ruddy-faced moon was out of place among the clouds' glossy ashes. The lads began to wake up and shake off their sleepiness. Their bluish lances shone against the moonlight. Their pointed fur hats lent them a heroic, sinister look. "Make ready, friends," said the old tribune. "We'll have a dinner you're going to relish tonight, a Saxon roasted whole." A chill crept up my spine at his words, but for all that I could not help feeling elated. Nisa led us along the pitch-black mountain trails. His stealthy, panther-like footsteps stirred no sound on the pebbles of ground gravel of the trail so easy to upset. Twin mountains cast their shadows across each other. The gloomy sky begot more clouds. The wind whistled among the rocks, misshapen stone skeletons. Now and then a boulder sat rolling down slope. A block was built off a rock and tumbled, roaring down toward the valley. We climbed down a mountain and took a path leading to the mill. The mill was locked and shuttered. Only the untrained dog was baying in distress in the moon. His sleepy foreboding bark far across the darkness. Nita signaled. We lay down on the ground. He stepped cautiously toward the dog, and from a safe distance threw the corn-mush balls, which the dog caught in mid-air and swallowed greedily. Before long the lettuce juice took effect, and we started to writhe in the sand by the river bank. Nita beckoned, and we moved on. The dog's belly had swollen tight as a drumhead. He was writhing in great pain. A lad took pity on him and stabbed his lance into his heart. We edged closer to the mill, tapped at the door, and heard the miller's brightened voice. "Who's there? Me, godfather," answered Nita, impersonating a gypsy. "What's it to you that we want in the dead of the night?" The miller asked. "I've got as bad news for you, godfather. The shepherds are coming this way. I saw them from here, and I've come to tell you to run away while the running's good. We heard the Saxon climbing up the steps unwieldy and coughing and stopping behind the door. As soon as he opened it, Nita caught him by the throat, so the Saxon, losing his presence of mind, dropped the lantern and the key, and his eyes set to whirling in their socks as he turned blue in the face. He would surely have strangled him if the old man had not called on him to let go. He had gagged and bound him fast. The Saxon was giving no chance to break the silence with a yell. The old tribune's eyes were flashing fire and whirling ominously in their sockets. He looked like the pale old herald of death. The mill sands with the miller's wife were roused from sleep and bound tightly, set the wheels moving, roared the old man. The wheels started turning and setting the millstones in motion, which revolved, grinding each other with much uproar. The deafening uproar of the stones turned to no purpose. The mill that had started reeling and groaning at its joints smothered the faint, choked cries of the gagged and bound men. A handful of lads went onto the roof of the mill and set to breaking it apart with their axes and throwing the shingles into the water, wherein they sank, and coming up floated down streams black as the souls of the drowned. They found a hogshead of black oil and spilled it all over the loft. The bound men were brought and fastened to the thick beams from the devastated roof, which had remained unbroken, and their gags had taken out. "Why did you sell us out?" the old man shouted loudly and terribly, his face the face of a marble fury, staring at the miller in the eyes. The Saxon was struck dumb with fright. No words, whether of mercy or hatred, would come to him. His jaws were glued and trembling, his eyes glassy like a madman's, his tongue stammered with inarticulate sounds. Fright had rendered him speechless. The woman was shedding bitter tears. The servants were casting earnest, imploring glances at the awesome demon of revenge. "Unbind the servants and the woman and take them to the river bank. The miller's to stay here." In a moment they were escorted to the bank. We climbed down the loft and went to the bank. A big fire was started quickly. "Who sold us out?" the old man asked the woman. "He did," she blurted out through the lamentations. "My husband. I advised him in vain not to meddle in anything, whether right or wrong, but to no avail. He wouldn't listen. The Hungarians paid him 200 gold zlotys, and he sold you at that price." "Woman," the old man said, "we hold no grudge against you, nor against you, my lads." He spoke to the servants. "Unbind the woman, and let her take the money and everything she can from the mill." "Hey, you lads, load your rifles. Let's finish them off," Nita said, laughing. "No," they whispered to one another. The servants were unbound. "Let's see the last of you," Nita ordered them. "Fire, friends," he urged our men. The Saxons took to their heels. The rifles cracked, but being unloaded, they only threw the running men into a greater scare. The woman came out of the mill with the money and the valuables and departed wailing. The miller started keening on the beam to which he had been fastened. The old man wove of a rope straw, soaked it in oil, lit it, and drew it up onto the roof. In a minute the oil's loft caught fire, and the miller's howls rose above the roar of the wheels and the din of the unfettered stones. The old tribune gave a savage laugh. His satanic idea was coming to life. He raised his axe and cut the ropes, tethering the mill downstream. The blazing mill jerked and started floating downstream. "Both fire and drowning!" the old man exclaimed terribly on the stone where he was standing, and shook his fist at the sky. "If I've done wrong, may his blood fall on my head." A blood-curdling scene. The wheels howling kept howling. The stones droning. The mill was crackling with fire. The miller was screaming his lungs out in his fiery tomb. The mill had the shape of the crippled old fiery dragon, who howled and furrowed with his disabled wings. The water turned red with his flames. It swam rapidly, carried by the turning wheels and the swift current. The groves lining the banks, reddened with the burning palace, passed by to let any spectator have a glimpse into the recesses of their paths. The clouds in the sky changed from grey to red, and the heavy, thick smoke, trailing in the wake of the departing mill, choked in our breaths. "The show's over, boys," said the old man, heaving a deep sigh and stepping down from his stone. "Back to our mountain. I shall never forget that unique scene." In the meantime the Hungarians had become unbearable. Mere suspicion, or less than that, was conclusive proof for them to hang or shoot someone. Death had become man's natural state. Life is unnatural state. They plundered the Romanian villages most barbarously, killed women and children ruthlessly, outdid each other in cruelty and savagery. It was but natural that the Romanians, driven to revenge as they were, should reciprocate both a tooth for a tooth and the like. The Hungarians had started a brigade, rather than a revolution, privileged as it were, the more pardonable as it was perpetrated on a nation of underdogs, the Romanians. Yet they had met their match. "A tooth for a tooth, an eye for an eye," was the Lancers' watchword, and they paid them back in kind. The Romanians did not plunder, they killed. People were not judged according to their social rank. The curly black head of the magnate and the hound-headed Honved were all the same, just as many heads shaking off their iron chains, as terrible as the scourge of God. Are not all peoples like that, gentle and peaceful while peace lasts, with genial physiognomies and sincere eyes, the shoulders bent under life's heavy burden, but meet them again in revolution. Look at the depth of the terrible soul concealed under the mask of geniality. See how they unearth the past offences on conjectural evidence. Behold how they will throw the chains off from around their wrists into the face of the soulless rulers. And the soulless rulers were frightened and would gladly barter all their riches for their lives. Yet the common people will have no riches, no use luring them with gold, no use clothing them in silk. You would fain weigh in gold the bread you have robbed from their babies' mouths. You would repay their bitter tears and their bloody sweat with all the hoary pearls of the East. Yet they will not have your golden pearls. They are after your life. And are they to blame for their conduct? Is there any law in nature that would not extenuate their deeds? Is there such a law in nature as to deprive you of the right to kill the ones who throughout the centuries have flogged your parents, have burnt your forebears at the stake, have strewn the wells and rivers with the children of your soul? The very laws standing at the basis of ethics entitle you to demand full compensation for what you have been robbed of, to pay back in kind, which is the only way to restore balance and justice in the world. Yet virtue would have you stop short of murder. No one can be obliged to be virtuous. Everyone is to be just. And when the sentence passed by that justice will not appoint an executioner, you had better turn into the executioner yourself. A man to kill an unread letter, a town to burn to the ground, a leaf to turn. That is the law in the book of Revolutions of God's own justice. Um, there are about 50 pages left, but I'm very cold. So I think I'll have to come back to this a little later, maybe. Um, yeah, and actually the battery level is not great. It's at 26. So I might also charge the neck again. So I'll just allow the next part to be like I'll just read the next not the next. I'll just read like about probably like the last 50 pages or so next time I stream. But it is getting cold. Um so I think I'll just stop there for now. And the next part it's resuming from um like that's all of the men's letter. So it goes back to the guy who received the letter. Anyway, so I'm going to stop here for now. But thank you for listening. I will read the rest soon. I'm just getting really cold. Goodbye for now.